Enchanting Melodies, HPSI by Athas Pakayar. 451, Chapter 451, Fimblewinter. 21st June 1995, Nurmengard. As if they were waiting for his words, a familiar man walked out of the shadows, Vlad. Harry had made sure that the vampire would remain far away when Daphne's ritual took place to avoid being affected as well. Similarly, Alexander Marinakis appeared in a burst of lightning, holding a trident in his hand, ready to attack as well. Surprisingly, Grindelwald grinned. This is going to be fun. This was it. The final battle. Months of planning on Harry's part and probably thousands of years of meddling all came to this single fight. This was a race against time, with the three most powerful and skilled mages in the world, other than Grindelwald and Dumbledore, of course, against the champion of the dark. They needed to stop him from activating the ritual, to defeat him before he was ready to unleash it, or at least delay it altogether until it was time for Harry's plan to finally pay off. This was, by far, the single most dangerous and unpredictable part of his plan. Harry could have accounted for much, could stack the odds to his favor as much as he could, but it all came down to this single fight, where he could win or lose everything. From the looks of it, the abomination that Grindelwald became seemed to agree. He chuckled, the sound sending shivers down their spines. For some reason, I always thought it would end like this. No armies, no games, not anymore. Just a battle between you and me, your best allies and mine. I think it was always meant to be this way. Magic against magic. He was right, of course. What Harry achieved alone was mind-blowing, and he didn't think anyone could have done more with the resources and time he had. Harry had wiped every vampire from the face of the earth, destroyed Grindelwald's army, and destroyed his seemingly impregnable fortress, without too many losses. He had outplayed Grindelwald in their little chess match, but cleverness was all nice and good. At the end of the day, it was always going to end in a fight, and the winner would be the one left standing. Harry didn't answer for a second, giving a look to Marinakis and Vlad, who also started to circle their opponent. I suppose this means that our game is over. The game is never over, Peveril. This is just a different sort of move. And just like that, he attacked. He created a pulse of darkness that swallowed everything it touched, which Harry cut in half with a sword of light. Grindelwald barely dodged as a gigantic slash of lightning was almost going to bisect him, and his shadow arm elongated, grabbing the man, only to be cut apart by another shadow from the courtesy of Vlad. The hand quickly morphed back and sent hundreds of shadow spikes at Vlad, which Marinakis shielded against immediately by conjuring a shield of green lightning, and Harry used this to his advantage by warping space in front of him and cutting through the Dark Lord's chest. The impact created another pulse of darkness, which Harry redirected upward by warping space all around them, only for his arcane hearing to warn him, creating a spherical portal around him, redirecting the thousands of strings of darkness that almost skewered him. Harry created another portal to move away from his position and move his old spherical ones to condense even further, before narrowing into a singularity that threatened to absorb everything in sight. Grindelwald's darkness was absorbed until he opened his mouth and released a beam of black flames, which wiped away the entire singularity. However, Harry rigged it so that dispelling the space-time manipulation would release the energy used to create it, creating a beam of plasma that raced towards the Dark Lord, which shielded against it by creating a force field which resisted it. However, he found himself bound by green chains made of lightning courtesy of Marinakis. Before he could react, Vlad ran at the Dark Lord at blinding speed, and Harry opened a portal to give the man an ice sword imbued with soul magic. The first vampire grasped the whole plan easily enough and used it to impale Grindelwald in the heart. It would do much, Harry knew that, but soul magic was the only way to truly harm the man, if he could even be called that. Grindelwald had literally turned his body into a physical embodiment of the dark. It was why he was most likely limited to dark-based magic, not that it made him any less dangerous. In fact, his spells seemed more potent, and he literally couldn't be hurt. What they were seeing now was essentially him using the ritual itself to somehow bind his soul to the material realm, meaning that he wouldn't need a body, not anymore. It was a bit short-sighted since he would die the moment the ritual took place, or at least he would have, if it wasn't for the fact that he planned to use it to ascend into a higher being, essentially a god, to the magical population that he sought to take with him. He had transcended the limitations of his body, which made him able to channel almost an unlimited amount of energy from the dark, and he would heal himself for as long as his connection to the dark remained. Well, attacking his soul hadn't worked so far. Oh, he was such an idiot. No wonder it didn't work. The man had used his soul as the main catalyst of his own ritual. There was so much energy there that trying to attack it with soul magic would have been akin to punching an ocean. It would literally achieve nothing, especially given that both Grindelwald and Dumbledore had proven themselves to be resistant to soul-based attacks before. No, he needed to come up with something, and quickly. Unfortunately, his thoughts were interrupted as he saw Grindelwald shatter the ice blade in Vlad's hands and hoist him up in the air by his neck while growling, "Traitorous worm!" Grindelwald's hand morphed into claws, ready to impale his teacher, only for Harry to conjure a portal, making the claw cut off his other hand, allowing Vlad to disappear. The Dark Lord released a growl, and he released another pulse of energy that Harry had to redirect. When the dust settled, Harry noticed that Grindelwald's figure was slimmer and the energy more controlled. He looked smaller, with the darkness receding a bit, with a mimicry of skin and humanity taking his place. Harry turned towards his allies and spoke up. "He's getting more control over his power. We need to stop him quickly." "What do you think we've been trying to do so far?" Vlad answered with sarcasm in his tone. He was right, but it wasn't working. They were trying to overwhelm a man with essentially unlimited energy at his disposal. The only thing limiting him was the rate of the flow of the energy from his connection to the dark, but also the fact that Grindelwald's soul, mutated as it was by his ritual, was still human. His perception of the world was still human, and that had nothing to do with his body. It was like an idea clicked in Harry's mind. It had been nothing more than a thought exercise before, but it could work. It was extremely fitting for this exact situation. He turned towards his allies and spoke up. "I have a plan, but I'll need you to buy me some time." Marinakis nodded and shared a look with Vlad. "That we can do. I've been itching to let loose a bit." The former headmaster then opened his hand, and a trident made of lightning appeared in his hand. Vlad conjured a crimson spear that looked like it was made of blood. "It's been a while since I used this. I suppose the end of time is fitting, if anything else." Grindelwald seemed amused by their conversation more than anything. Brave but foolish. And yet, who am I to deny a chance at vengeance? After all, you're the one who betrayed me, who called me a fool, who said that my dream was impossible, who refused to join me when I almost begged you to. What do you think? Gellert, you were one of the most brilliant men I have ever met, let alone taught. You have achieved greatness, but at what cost? I should have helped you see the error of your ways. I should have helped you instead of scorning you, which I do regret. Because when I look at you, I cannot see the boy I helped raise, the boy I taught, only a monster who is wearing his face. The only reaction was that the Dark Lord's shroud of darkness rumbled as if it was echoing his mood, and he simply stated, "Then you will die with that regret." The ground cracked beneath their feet as Grindelwald raised his hand. Shadows coalesced above him, spiraling inward until they formed a jagged blade of writhing darkness, pulsing like a heartbeat. With a single step, he vanished and reappeared behind Marinakis, blade already descending. A flash of silver. The former headmaster spun mid-air, intercepting the blow with his trident. Lightning surged from the weapon, splitting the ground as raw power lashed out. The impact threw both men back, but Marinakis landed steady, sliding across the rubble, eyes locked on Grindelwald. Before Grindelwald could strike again, Vlad appeared behind him, his crimson spear already in motion. He threw it with a speed that seemed to warp through space itself to find its target. Grindelwald twisted, raising a shield of condensed shadows that shattered on impact, sending a shockwave through the air. The Dark Lord swung his sword, and a slash of darkness erupted from the edge, roaring across the battlefield like a tidal wave. Vlad leapt above it, cloak billowing, then twisted mid-air and sent a barrage of spear-shaped blood projectiles down upon Grindelwald. The man cut through each with clinical grace, his blade moving like ink in water, no wasted motion. Sparks of black energy exploded in every direction as he advanced, step by step, undeterred. Marinakis raised his trident to the sky, thunder gathering in swirling arcs. A lightning storm speared down upon Grindelwald, turning night to day. But the shadows wrapped around him like armor, absorbing the strikes until only scorched earth remained beneath his feet. Then he exploded in a pulse of darkness, which slowly started to gather back into its source until Grindelwald seemed to be as tall as a building, made entirely of shadows and darkness, and he swung his sword, only for Marinakis' trident to grow almost as large and repel it as well, with the collision creating a burst of lightning and thunder that sent everything away. The lightning started to solidify into an armor around the former headmaster, who also grew seemingly as large as his opponent. The two giants were about to meet, only for a black blur to appear out of thin air on Grindelwald's body of shadows. It was Vlad. He had stabbed his blood spear into the man, which immediately enlarged. But it didn't stop there. With a growl that echoed like a curse from the depths of the earth, Vlad gripped the spear and channeled his magic into it. Blood erupted from the ground, rivers of it, flowing toward Grindelwald like they were answering a summons. Dozens of crimson pikes erupted upward, impaling the Dark Lord's massive shadow form like jagged thorns through flesh. Grindelwald roared in fury, darkness flaring, trying to dissolve the spears. But they held, with Vlad using his very magic to maintain them, using them to channel a blood magic spell. Harry didn't know what price Vlad paid, but its purpose was to destabilize Grindelwald's connection to the dark. It seemingly worked. For a fraction of a second, the Dark Lord's form trembled, destabilized, shadow limbs flickering in and out of reality. It was just for a heartbeat. That was all Marinakis needed. His armor, gleaming with electric fury, began to dissolve, streams of energy flowing into his trident, which pulsed brighter and brighter until it could no longer hold shape. It warped, shimmered, and then burst forth in a radiant explosion of light. The trident had transformed into a colossal creature of storm and spirit, wings of lightning, hooves of starlight. A Pegasus forged from the very essence of thunder and almost divine wrath. It reared, then leapt into the sky, galloping through the clouds, and as it soared, the sky split. Reality bent beneath its hooves. A shockwave of light followed it, parting the heavens as it dived. Grindelwald, still reeling, snarled and raised his hands. A massive sphere of energy coalesced before him, pure, undiluted dark. He unleashed it in a roar, a torrent of void energy meeting the divine beast mid-flight. The sky collapsed. The two forces met in a colossal impact, swallowing the horizon in white and black, silence and thunder. The battlefield disappeared beneath a dome of annihilation. The sound sucked from the world. For a second, the world takes its breath. Then, the world detonated. Wind, light, ash. Magic warped into static. The earth cracked for miles, and as the shockwave blew outward, even Grindelwald's shadow form was ripped apart, scattered like ash in the storm. Silence returned, deafening, and from the scorched ground, the Pegasus, broken, fading, dissolved into sparks that drifted upward like dying stars. Only one figure still stood amidst the ruin. Harry. He could still sense Grindelwald's soul, obviously going to regenerate soon, but for this fraction of a second he could enact his plan. He whispered to himself, "Fimblewinter." Norse runes started to glow from the entire battlefield, glowing, and yet for the casual observer, they looked like they were shifting in and out of reality, a small side effect of using them with Solomon's magic. From them, a coldness unlike the world had ever seen existed, not just on a physical level, but capable of freezing souls themselves. Ice crept from the ground, with time itself slowly slowing to a halt. Harry could see his every breath stop. He could see Grindelwald's form slowly flicker into existence, the dark trying to manifest his soul into existence, but Harry didn't let it. He increased his magic, slowing things down even further. But it wouldn't be enough. Harry knew that perfectly well, and instead he started to sing. It started slowly, like a small pulse of energy, a realm born beneath his feet and expanding until it covered the entire valley. He could feel Grindelwald trying to rage, but that was his weakness. For all his existence, he was still immortal and saw the world as one. He was bound to the laws of time like every person was. Each note was a concept, a law, an edict echoing through the fabric of reality itself. The realm that bloomed from beneath his feet was no longer Earth. It was a domain, a sealed world where only one will held dominion. His. Fimblewinter was not just a spell, it was a concept, a myth, of an eternal winter before Ragnarok. It was carved into the very world, and using it as a beacon for his realm made it more stable and more real. Ice formed around Grindelwald's soul as it tried to manifest, but Harry held it firm once more. The dark writhed, but every twitch became slower, dimmer, and still Harry sang. He could feel his magic circuits burning. Even with the efficiency of Solomon's magic, Harry could only keep a fucking realm going for so long. He had literally improvised this, and yet he only had to keep it for a little longer. Just a little longer. That was what he kept saying to himself. He only had to get Grindelwald not to activate his ritual for as long as possible, until hopefully his plan worked. It was close, he could tell. It was so close. Just a little longer. Until he felt his knees buckle. Something was trying to break in. Something was trying to destroy his realm. He felt a flash of agony with every attempt he rebuffed. Something outer, something more, wanted to break it. Harry could only do so much until there was a small crack. It was minuscule, but it was more than enough to consume it. The very dark, chaotic, and destructive leaked through and unraveled the spell, essentially attempting to subsume the entire realm and save its champion. And just like that, the entire realm cracked, like glass, and Harry found himself kneeling in the material realm once more, with Grindelwald slowly reforming himself once more. It wasn't fair. Harry had won. He had him literally imprisoned, frozen in time and space. He wanted to rage and scream at it all, but he stopped himself. The young magician had still achieved something. He had still delayed the ritual by a lot. He steeled himself and slowly stood up, watching Grindelwald, whose amusement had faded completely. "I underestimated you. I didn't think I could, not after what you have done before, but you would have achieved it by delaying my ascension for just a few hours. You cannot fight against infinity. Goodbye, Peveril. You were a worthy opponent." Slowly but surely, hundreds of dark constructs started to encircle Harry, trapping him beneath them, hoping to snuff him out. Until they were cut apart with a slice of energy which fractured the world like a broken mirror. It wasn't fire, it wasn't lightning, it wasn't anything of this world. The slash burned in every color and none, a prismatic, shifting blade of pure dimensional chaos carved through the constructs, disintegrating them. No, it was better to say that it unmade them. Harry's previous scythe appeared back in his hand, but in the place of his blade was a swirling edge of fractal light, as if reality itself had been bent, layered and folded into a weapon. He raised his weapon against Grindelwald and spoke up, his voice echoing over what remained of the battlefield. "You're not the only one who can break the rules of the game, Grindelwald." 452, Chapter 452, Fate and Time. 21st June 1995, Nurmengard. Harry's previous scythe appeared back in his hand, but in the place of his blade was a swirling edge of fractal light, as if reality itself had been bent, layered, and folded into a weapon. He raised his weapon against Grindelwald and spoke up, his voice echoing over what remained of the battlefield. "You're not the only one who can break the rules of the game, Grindelwald." The Dark Lord stared at Harry, looking even more surprised than before, and the young mage could understand why. He had beaten Grindelwald. There was no going around this. Harry had won their previous fight. His plan had worked. He had trapped Grindelwald in a realm of his own creation, where time itself was frozen completely. It was an attack from the dark that literally saved him. Harry saw that now. His plan backfired in a way that Harry didn't really expect. The fact that Harry created a realm out of nothing meant that this dimension wouldn't have the inherent protections that the material realm had. The same protection that was stopping the light and dark from invading. He had assumed that by creating the realm while inside Midgard, its properties would protect him. But he forgot the fact that he was essentially using his soul as the realm's basis, meaning that, given the multiversal properties of souls, It made the realm accessible to the light and dark, and since the champion of the dark had been trapped there, it was no wonder that the entity decided to attack when it could. It wasn't fair, but battle seldom was. The fact remained that Grindelwald was being supported by a very powerful external entity, while Harry had to rely on his wits to make any progress. It must have grated his pride seriously to actually end up being bailed out by his patron after losing to a teenager. Nevertheless, as he watched Grindelwald conjure creatures of darkness, each one almost as big as a small building, ready to kill him, something just clicked. Grindelwald was essentially channeling the nigh-infinite power of the dark. It was only right that he did the same. He had been leery of trying to mess with dimensions too much, and with good reason. Everything showed that the void between worlds was a very dangerous place. Nidhogg's presence alone made him extremely wary, and there was always the fear of making too much noise, of putting their realm into the eyes of something powerful, which was a bad idea to say the least. But right now, he didn't care, not anymore. He was out of options. He couldn't see Marinakis or Vlad anywhere, and literally trapping Grindelwald in an inescapable prison hadn't worked. And so he reached out to Eternity, and it answered. The process was agonizing, to say the least. To hold even a fraction of it in his body had overwhelmed his magic circuits very quickly, exactly as Grindelwald and Dumbledore were limited due to their human bodies. Of course, they had grown with this power inside them, which slowly made their bodies adapt to channeling it. If Harry had been some sort of magical creature, he would have maybe been able to withhold the energy for a handful of seconds, but that wasn't the case. It was why Grindelwald was so much more powerful now. He didn't even have a physical body anymore, just a projection of dark energy that manifested his soul, allowing him to bypass his previous physical limitations. Nevertheless, Harry had something that neither Grindelwald nor Dumbledore had, and that was mastery over the Deathly Hallows. He had used his family crest to combine them into a scythe, capable of harming souls, phasing through any shields and amplifying magic. But it hadn't been enough against Grindelwald. Nothing was. But it was almost perfectly designed to channel an enormous amount of magic. And so, Eternity was absorbed by the Elder Wand, unable to shatter thanks to the Resurrection Stone, and grounded by the Cloak of Invisibility, which wrapped the unstable energy in layers of unreality. The scythe didn't crack or burn. No, it sang, much like Harry was. It was perfect, and with a slice, he unmade the shadows that had attacked him. The weapon made him feel whole, in a way that he had never felt before, and the battlefield stood silent, as Harry had done the impossible once more. The Dark Lord's eyes were wide in shock, having reverted into a semi-human form. He murmured to himself, but Harry could still hear it very clearly. "What are you?" "I told you. I'm Harry Potter, the last Peverell, the master of the Deathly Hallows, and the Lord of Space and Time. These weren't all empty titles, you know." If Harry couldn't defeat Grindelwald by trapping him inside a realm, then he'd bring the realms to him. With a flick of his scythe, a gigantic rift opened from the sky, and a small meteorite appeared, falling towards Grindelwald at a very high speed. Grindelwald's response was immediate. His eyes widened for a single heartbeat before his hands shot up, releasing a massive beam of darkness that howled against the falling mass. It wasn't just a spell, it was a torrent of void, a scream of entropy given form, and it slammed into the meteorite with enough force to tear apart the very air. The two forces clashed mid-sky, held in a suspended battle of wills, the meteorite halting slightly as the beam flared brighter. But it wasn't a rock. It wasn't even a meteorite. It was a mass of condensed, formless chaos, energy from the space between worlds, the void itself wrapped and woven by Harry's will into something shaped, something aimed. It was not bound by physical law, and as such, it began to unravel the darkness that resisted it. Grindelwald's deduction of the situation was impressively quick. Instead of panicking, he channeled as much energy as he could into a shield, a monstrous dome of darkness, jagged and pulsing. It formed around him, a fortress forged from his very essence, trying to hold back the inevitable. The meteorite struck the shield, and the world broke. There was no sound, only distortion. A ripple of unreality surged outward, bending light, curving the sky, and tearing gravity into ribbons. The air folded, the ground buckled, and for a moment, space itself was wounded. For a fraction of a second, the infinity of the dark met the eternity of the void, and the material world didn't know how to handle it. Nevertheless, it was an opportunity. Harry warped space in front of him, leaping in the air thanks to a magic circle beneath his feet. He accelerated, scaling through the giant rocks, whose behavior was random, given the uncertainty of the rules of physics due to the impact of the two forces. He threw himself forward, but Grindelwald saw him coming and conjured spears of shadows, trying to deter him. Harry, though, turned into his raven form and dodged them, while keeping his momentum before turning back into his human form with his scythe raised fractal edge gleaming like the edge of reality itself. He didn't aim for Grindelwald's body, he aimed for his tether, his connection with the dark, much like what Lily had done before. After all, with a body made essentially from energy from the dark, if Harry severed the connection, then Grindelwald would die. Harry had barely touched it before Grindelwald realized what was happening and condensed a pulse of destruction given form, essentially the same amount of energy that he was sending to attack his opponent. The last Potter raised a hasty barrier, creating layers of bent space and temporal traps, but they were overwhelmed immediately. Every piece of magic was consumed immediately, undone by the sheer potency of the dark. The young mage found himself having barely been able to survive the attack by singing a small realm into existence, which took the brunt of the attack. Nevertheless, the impact sent Harry flying away, and he found himself on the ground, barely having succeeded in surviving the impact by conjuring a magic circle to stop his descent. He expected Grindelwald to follow up on his attack, only to hear a great impact as the Dark Lord was hit with the meteorite. At least his attack distracted Grindelwald. It was the logical step to take. Harry's attack could have actually harmed him, and instead, Grindelwald had let himself be hit with an attack he could regenerate from, instead of suffering any permanent harm. Too bad for him, the ball of chaos had done exactly what Harry had wanted. When the condensed chaos struck, the impact created some weird chaotic singularity for lack of a better word. It wasn't just space bending or time stuttering, it was the very concept of them faltering. Up no longer meant anything. The sky twisted into a spiral of mirrored reflections. Colors bled out of the world, turning into sounds, while gravity surged sideways before collapsing inward again. It had created a miniature slice of chaos in a structured realm, a place in which, for just a period of time, the laws of physics, the laws of space and time became far more flexible. With a flick of his scythe, the breach closed itself, and Harry watched as Grindelwald reformed himself once more. He sent a beam of darkness at Harry, who countered by opening a breach in front of him. A solar flare met the beam of pure destruction and held it in place. Grindelwald's beam faltered, distorted mid-flight, as if the magic itself was hesitating. The structured entropy that had once torn through shields and realms began to warp, its edges flickering, bleeding light, unraveling into incoherence. His magic destabilized, spasming, erratic, bleeding fragments of unbound concept, and then, like a collapsing star, it flared once more, and disintegrated into a chaotic solar flare that licked across his semi-corporeal form, tearing through his shadow flesh with ease. In a second, though, he was back, his eyes glowing in fury. "What did you do?" Harry coughed, pushing himself upright with his scythe, grinning despite the blood on his lips. "You've always underestimated small things, Grindelwald. You regenerated from the attack, yes, but chaos had a tendency to stick around." He stood fully, the scythe glowing in his grip. "You're channeling structured destruction, entropy given form, but this," he gestured to the crater, where reality still twitched and shimmered, "this isn't structure. We're fighting in a domain of chaos now, and chaos doesn't have rules." Grindelwald didn't respond. Not with words, anyway. The shadows behind Harry twisted, darker than even the void-choked sky above. No sound, no warning, just a spike of power. A blade of pure annihilation surged forward, forged from distilled oblivion, aiming for Harry's exposed back. It moved with certainty, the kind of attack that didn't miss, didn't fail. Except it did. The blade stopped, mid-motion, frozen inches from Harry's spine, its edges vibrating against the tension of locked time. Grindelwald was behind it, eyes wide, body strained forward like a predator in mid-pounce, frozen not by choice, but by force. And then, like a corrupted reel unwinding, he began to move backwards. Slowly, agonizingly, second by second, the entire sequence unraveled. Grindelwald stepping back, the blade returning to his hand, the shadows retreating like a receding tide. Harry turned his head slightly, watching with mild interest as the Dark Lord was rewound like a spell undone, his hand glowing slightly, the only sign of his magic, holding the champion of the dark, for as much as possible in the small trap. After all, for just this moment, the laws of space and time were his to command. And so Grindelwald lunged again, same attack, same fury, and again he rewound, again, and again. Each time the moment snapped backwards, a time loop. Or it would have been better to call it a time trap. Here, in this broken pocket of warped space, time didn't flow, it spiraled, and Harry commanded it with an iron fist. It was draining, to say the least, but if he could just stop it for a little longer, he would win. This was a race against time, and for now, time was his bitch. Of course, Harry expected Grindelwald to quickly realize what was going on. After all, he would sense that time wasn't flowing naturally at some point. But time in a magical battle was a powerful thing. Preparation and setting up complex attacks could change the outcome easily. And the young mage had bought himself enough time to set up his final attack. This was it, all or nothing. He would kill Grindelwald. Slowly, he sang a realm into creation and created a breach within it. By his command, his realm slowly started to absorb as much of the void as he could, filled with enough energy to create a miniature realm. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't even stable, but it would do. Meanwhile, his grasp on his time loop was slowly fading as the Dark Lord obviously kept fighting against it. Harry did his best to reinforce the trap, but eventually the Dark Lord broke through it with a pulse of pure darkness. Harry warped space in front of him, redirected the attack, and the Dark Lord growled, having fallen to his knees slightly, "You cannot win. The best you could do is delay me. Eventually you'll run out of tricks, and I'll tear your soul apart. Eventually my ritual will activate, and believe me, anyone you ever loved, anyone you even felt a smidge of care towards, will suffer. Believe me, I don't lack creativity." The young mage gave him a smirk. "Oh, I think I have one more trick up my sleeve." He ran towards Grindelwald, his scythe raised, the fractal edge bending reality in its wake, trailing a cascade of collapsing light and reversed echoes. The Dark Lord snarled, raising a shield of shadows layered with wards and entropic pulses. Barriers that had once withstood gods. But they shattered before contact. Harry didn't strike the shield, he struck before the shield existed. Cause unraveled. Effect took its place first. The blow had already landed before Grindelwald's magic had a chance to react. Time and space screamed in protest, but the laws had already lost their grip. And so the scythe sliced clean through the Dark Lord's chest. Grindelwald gasped, reeling, stumbling backwards. The connection flared behind his eyes, raw, panicked. Harry didn't stop. He twisted the blade, and with a single wordless command, the scythe absorbed the small realm he had carved earlier into existence, folding it into the weapon. The Elder Wand drank it greedily, stabilized by the resurrection stone, wrapped in unreality by the cloak. He raised it again. The link was there, flickering, struggling. A tether to the dark, raw, ancient, infinite, and for a moment Harry held it in his hand. He was going to cut it. He was going to end it. But chaos dissipated. Without warning, the air crystallized into stillness, the sky smoothed, and the horizon snapped back into linearity, magic condensed, clarified, calcified. Order reasserted itself with such force that it drowned chaos with silence. A tidal wave of light followed a purity that smothered paradox and burned the frayed ends of time itself. Grindelwald's eyes widened in recognition and savage relief. Harry was barely able to dodge the attack of pure light, an attack that created pure stillness, essentially disintegrating everything completely. Then he saw him. White robes unmarred, hair gleaming like silver fire, but it was his eyes, brilliant, blinding white, that silenced everything else. Dumbledore had arrived. Harry suppressed the urge to groan. as if everything hadn't been complicated so far. 453, Chapter 453, Eternally Bright. 21st June 1995, unknown place. And just like that, with a heavy heart, Albus committed the greatest act of sacrilege in his life and stabbed Excalibur into the boulder. The light screamed and the world itself turned white. Albus Dumbledore groaned as he opened his eyes, wondering where he was and what had happened. He had been fighting the Potter boy with the aim of making sure that the final prophecy would break and that their ritual would be finally ready. After that, he remembered feeling pain unlike he had ever done before as he broke Excalibur, the weapon of light, the sword of promised victory, which Merlin himself had weaponized fate itself to craft. And then everything just turned black. Damn it, he needed to get back as quickly as possible. Ragnarok was coming, and Albus's inevitable confrontation against Grindelwald, the final battle between the light and dark, should be any time now. For all their friendship, Gellert was extremely ruthless and would use his temporary absence to get even more advantage. Albus couldn't afford that, especially given that he had already lost his greatest weapon when he destroyed Excalibur. The contrast of the sheer brightness he was feeling as he opened his eyes gave him a small migraine. It wasn't just sunlight, no, this was something far purer, far more oppressive. He blinked a few times, his vision finally adjusting, only to freeze. He was standing in a vast, empty field of white. No horizon, no sky, no sound. Just light. Endless, overwhelming, suffocating light. It was familiar in its unbending way, like an old teacher whose lessons were carved in pain and sacrifice. There was no warmth to it, only judgment. The kind that didn't scream or rage, but simply existed, absolute and final. It didn't need to speak for Albus to understand that he was meeting his patron. And given the oppression he felt, which was a stark contrast to the soothing comfort he experienced in its order previously, it wasn't happy with him. He knew that this could happen. After all, he had failed it. No, it was worse than that. He had betrayed the light, not unknowingly or anything like that, but actively made the decision to do it. Albus didn't regret it. Not really, and he would do it again. Humanity's survival was far more precious than his devotion to the light. It had been the only line in the sand. The former headmaster was prepared to die, to kill his oldest friend and most devoted allies for the light, but he would not sacrifice humanity for its battle. But the light didn't care for intentions. It never had. It was a force, not a friend. A truth that Albus had known but never truly understood until now. Here, in its domain, stripped of his wand and will, there was no room for justification, no place for noble lies. Only the weight of his defiance. A familiar voice spoke up. "Ah, Albus the Defiant, how was your little act of defiance?" Dumbledore turned, glaring at the source of the voice, and spoke up. "Is this another trick of yours, Merlin? Am I even speaking to you?" The white-haired man with the mischievous eyes snickered. "There is no place for lies here." "But you're not Merlin, are you?" "I am in every way that matters," the former court mage of Camelot uttered. "The light chooses its champions when they're children. It makes it easier for them to be influenced like that. The entity records everything that happens to us, every moment, every feeling. I'm a recording of everything Merlin ever experienced, everything he ever felt, every thought he ever had. The light believed that this would make things easier for you to accept, or more accurately, a way to better interpret their intent. After all, a foreboding feeling or a push here and there could work, but it chose the direct approach for now." Albus nodded, still feeling guarded. Despite what happened with Fawkes, Merlin was by far the champion of light, which he respected the most. Despite his failure in Camlan, he had become something of a godly figure for all mages across the world. His feats were widely acclaimed, and he had changed the landscape of magic for everyone after him. Hell, in every way that mattered, he had won. It was his ideology, his work, that lasted for centuries after his death. He could see the logic of the light using him as a mouthpiece, a way for him to lower his guard. His caution must have shown because Merlin started to snicker. "You're in the light's domain. There's no need to be so nervous. If it wanted you dead, then you'd be dead. That said, You really did your best to screw things up, didn't you? Destroying my sword like that was rude, to say the least. Finally, they were at the crux of the problem, and the former headmaster answered with a firm tone, his voice echoing strangely in the blank eternity around them. I know that I shouldn't have destroyed Excalibur. I know that I betrayed the light while doing so, but that doesn't change anything. Humanity was always going to be my priority. The light wanted a war that would leave the world in ashes. I chose not to save as many of us as I could before the end, and I would have gladly fought and died for it. It was the one that failed me. It didn't care that humanity would perish, and so this fell on my shoulders. Merlin, or the memory of him, smiled faintly with something that was not quite amusement. Of course it didn't care. Humanity is just a single species with a very limited lifespan, a species that's barely out of its diapers. It's not special, not to them. It is special. We have created gods out of the void and empowered them with our worship. I know the value of my people. This isn't humanity's power, this is Midgard's. The material realm stands at the center of the cosmos and amplifies whatever effects humanity has on the other realms. It's not special, but Midgard is. This is why the war is for Midgard, for the material realm, not for humanity. Hell, humanity might be an obstacle. After all, our people have shown that they were very fickle with their worship. Countless realms and gods have been created and faded into obscurity, with nothing more than a whimper. Your plan to eventually return humanity to Midgard would always present a risk. After all, a united humanity could dream of a challenger to the light or the dark, even after Ragnarok. Dumbledore felt enraged. That's monstrous. The former champion of light seemed outraged. No, it's strategic. You're missing the point as to why gaining control over Midgard is so critical. There is a reason why both the light and dark want it. They could express their wills on this plane and influence the void between worlds one step at a time. Even the gods could be affected, strengthened, and weakened. There is a reason why this realm was neutral. This would have become nothing more than a battlefield. No, before Atlantis fell, gods and demons alike made an agreement to empower themselves and avoid more gods from being born. Every single pantheon was allowed to influence humans from the outside, but without direct interference, to strengthen their positions. It was a system doomed to fail, and the main reason why the Great Cataclysm happened. To make things brief, keeping humanity alive on Midgard would present a future risk to the light's supremacy, a risk that they are not willing to have. So that's what we all are. Just pawns on the board, Dumbledore muttered to himself, but then raised his voice. If that's the case, then why did the Dark help Grindelwald in our plan? Why did the Dark protect humanity? Merlin gave the former headmaster a disappointed look. Even now, you are too blind to see what is before you. Grindelwald betrayed you. He had no intention of bringing humanity back to Midgard. His agreement with the Dark was simple. It would create a realm, which would have every single magical being in this place, and Grindelwald would ascend as their god, completely separated from the Dark. In exchange, he would start Ragnarok, and our final battle would finally begin. I don't believe you, Albus retorted, only for some mist to appear in thin air, showing Grindelwald revealing his plan to Harry Potter. He froze, slowly realizing that he'd been duped. Gellert had no plans of saving the Muggles, only the worthy mages and magical creatures. This was their greatest point of debate. When they were younger, Gellert had always been in favor of exterminating the Muggles, calling them a threat to mage kind. Albus never really believed him. They had progressed, yes, but not nearly enough to fight the magical world, not enough to even detect its presence. To be honest, he'd been concerned a bit about their advancement in his older years and had a few plans ready, mostly wards that would mess with any form of surveillance that would detect magic. Alas, he didn't need to do it. After Ragnarok, magic would inevitably be detected, but the Muggle infrastructure would have been gone, destroyed by the fighting, and the Muggles would go back to being defenseless, giving the mages more than enough time to merge into their society properly, providing services through friendship and maybe a bit of magical persuasion. But to think that Gellert was planning on leaving them to die, not out of hate, but to use the energy that would save billions to ascend. It was a betrayal that Albus hadn't seen coming. He had destroyed Excalibur for this, to let the Muggles die and let Grindelwald rule a mockery of the magical world. Rage. Pure rage. That was what Albus was feeling. Rage at himself, rage at the world, rage at Gellert, rage at the light and rage at the dark. Then the defeat came, and the former headmaster slumped. "Why didn't you tell me? I know that you're the light's mouthpiece, so why didn't you say anything?" Merlin's face turned neutral, and Albus could finally see the unnaturalness speaking through him. Each word felt more like a spell, like an order than a conversation. Because it didn't interfere with our plan. Ragnarok would happen, and there wouldn't be anyone left on Midgard after our victory. The plan was that you would use Excalibur to defeat Grindelwald, that you would take his place as the ruler of the new realm of mages, and that by killing him with our greatest weapon, it would be the chink in the armor that would get us to finally destroy the dark, just as Merlin planned. We would have been victorious. The dark would have died, and you would have been a god in everything but name, ruling the magical world, shaping it into your treasured utopia. You would have achieved your dream. Alas, with your actions, you have jeopardized everything. "You could have said something," he protested. "How was I supposed to know?" "You were not supposed to know. You were supposed to have faith," Merlin's sharp voice echoed. "And yet you chose rebellion, and our position is now untenable, with Ragnarok being so close." Albus looked down, ashamed. He shouldn't have tried to defy his patron. He should have known better than to defy it, to betray it like that. And now Gellert's twisted vision of the magical world would be what remains of humanity, and the battle between the light and dark was now uncertain. "I suppose this is it, time for my punishment?" the former headmaster asked, his voice even. Merlin's voice lost its inhumanity and turned a bit more casual, more normal. "Funnily enough, no. You're very lucky. If it had been any other time, then you'd have been punished very heavily, but you are very lucky if one could call you that. Ragnarok is coming, and the light needs its champion." "How?" he asked, feeling slightly desperate. "Just watch," the former archmage retorted. What he saw was one of the greatest battles he had ever seen, his duel with Gellert included. The Potter boy had surprisingly kept up during their fight. Nurmengard had fallen, the vampires wiped out from the face of the earth, and all that remained was the final fight between the Potter boy and Gellert. To his surprise, Gellert had turned himself into some inhuman being of darkness, essentially a demonic creature bound to the dark. By using his soul as the catalyst to his ritual, trying to salvage as much as possible of his plans. The Potter boy was coming very close to killing Gellert, each attack being surprisingly effective. "Impressive, isn't he?" Merlin continued with wonder in his tone. "He's fighting against impossible odds, with nothing to rely on but his wits and planning. Do you know that he actually came very close to killing the light and the dark? Grindelwald's warning is one of the reasons we weren't tricked. He crafted a weapon that would trick two entities into destroying themselves without even noticing. Even now his weapons resist being destroyed, but the light was able to slowly overpower them and stop any magical infection from spreading. And look at him, fighting your counterpart, stalling for time that would never happen. He will eventually die. It will only take a single mistake, and his tale will end. So much potential, gone down the drain." "And what? You want me to save him?" Merlin's eyes glowed white once more, and his voice turned inhuman. "No, we want you to kill him. He is too dangerous to be left alive. He has almost managed to destroy us once. We will not give him the chance to do it again. You will use this." Slowly but surely, a spear made of pure light appeared in thin air and materialized in front of Albus. It hovered with unnatural stillness, humming with a resonance that felt like law incarnate. "What is this?" "A weapon forged the essence of the light itself, the spear of the end. It will kill anything it touches and is enhanced by whatever it touches. Take the hallows from the boy, take his weapon, and kill your final enemy." "What's the price?" Albus asked, knowing perfectly that with weapons like this, there will always be a price to it. "This weapon is not natural. It is not material in nature. And you, as its wielder, will eventually combust under the weight of its authority," Merlin intoned, his voice echoing like judgment made manifest. "It is forged from the essence of the light itself and meant for one task, to end what should not be." Albus stared at the spear. It was beautiful in the most terrifying way, pure, perfect, absolute. He could already feel it pressing against his soul, like it sought to overwrite his very being. Kill the Potter boy with him. Kill the boy who carries the Hallows, and you will usurp their authority. The wand, the cloak, the stone. They are fragments of death's domain. Slay their bearer, and the spear will absorb them, becoming whole. This will give you the edge against the champion of the dark. This will injure the dark itself, enough to influence the coming battle. It will also allow you to usurp Grindelwald's ritual. You can save humanity, all of it, by sending them to Grindelwald's empty realm under the guidance of the light, which they will thrive under the guidance of the light, under its eternal order. You didn't mention the cost, the former headmaster commented. You will burn, Merlin whispered, voice finally losing its edge and turning reverent. The spear will consume you when you use it fully. Your final attack should not only hurt the dark, but also activate Ragnarok and usurp a ritual, using it to save billions of lives. The soul is a powerful and rigid thing, but even it has limits. When you are done, your soul will be claimed. And there will be no afterlife, no redemption, no memory. But in that final moment, you will have shaped the future. A pause. A god for an instant. Then, nothing. That is your punishment, but in exchange, your dream will become reality. Humanity will be saved, living in a utopia, an order of light. The spear floated closer, pulsing brighter now. A final choice, a final sacrifice. Yet it was perhaps one of the easiest ones he ever made. After all, what was one more sacrifice for the greater good? Humanity's survival came first, and the light's offer was an enticing one. And so Albus grasped the spear and felt the light's small presence pour into every corner of his soul, flooding him with power and purpose. It was too much. Already he could feel the fraying of his soul at the edges, but it didn't matter, not anymore. He turned, gaze hardened, and whispered with quiet finality, "For the greater good." And the world began to shift. 454, Chapter 454, The Grey Death. 21st June, 1995, Nurmengard. Then he saw him. White robes, unmarred, hair gleaming like silver fire, but it was his eyes, brilliant, blinding white, that silenced everything else. Dumbledore had arrived. Harry suppressed the urge to groan, as if everything hadn't been complicated so far. Harry watched as Dumbledore entered the battlefield at last. He knew that it would have happened initially. Hell, he'd been prepared to fight both him and Grindelwald at once. Well, it was more accurate to say that he'd been planning on turning them against one another, revealing Grindelwald's plans to him and getting them to fight. It would have allowed him to set up a trap, or to just buy some time until his plan came into effect. When Dumbledore disappeared after their fight in Hogwarts, a part of him was glad, as he would have one less enemy to deal with, but it also removed a piece on the board that he'd been planning on using, which messed up a lot of his plans for the fight against Grindelwald. The young mage was actually taken completely off guard when Dumbledore destroyed one of the light's most potent weapons, something he could have used against Grindelwald to great effect because of the prophecy tied to it. Excalibur was a mythical blade, a weapon unlike anything Harry had seen before, an abomination surely, but a powerful one, to say the least. The light had obviously not taken kindly to that, and a part of Harry hoped that this would have been it. Of course, the more logical part said that it was very unlikely that the light would give up on its only champion just minutes or hours before Ragnarok. It would practically guarantee the Dark's victory, as it would have abandoned its only remaining agent on Midgard. So no, Dumbledore's return wasn't surprising. In fact, it was inevitable. But that didn't mean Harry had to like it. Still, it was funny how Dumbledore had turned into a piece of the game instead of a player. In a way, he'd always been a piece, probably since he'd been thrown out of Hogwarts. Looking back, it was probably meant to destabilize Dumbledore's position completely. Grindelwald hadn't just taken away his political influence, but literally shattered his dreams for magical Britain, which he spent decades carefully planning, and just as quickly he replaced them with his own, with the crisis that was Ragnarok, slowly and methodically making the champion of the light fall into darkness, lose his morals for the sake of a greater goal, humanity survival, enough that he would even betray the light, enough that he stopped being a player and just a piece, a powerful one, of course, but a piece nonetheless. And now it seemed that he'd done something foolish again, given the way he was radiating light. It wasn't flowing through him, it was consuming him, puppeteering his body like a divine marionette dressed in robes of order and judgment. The spear of light that materialized in his hand was just as abominable. It just felt wrong, and Harry hadn't had time to properly analyze it yet, given that Dumbledore had just attacked him moments prior, but he recognized the soul magic hidden beneath the surface, while the weapon itself was essentially a small, minuscule shard of light. By that, Harry didn't mean the way Dumbledore had done before with the light's energy, but an actual fragment of the realm of light itself, given form. By slowly wielding it, Dumbledore, his very soul, his very essence, was being consumed by it. Grindelwald seemed to stare at it in horror as well, his body trying to mimic that of his former human self. "What have you done, Albus?" "What was necessary," the former headmaster's voice answered, steely and missing the very small piece of humanity that the man had left, "to atone for my actions." "Well, you couldn't have come at a better time, old friend. It appears that the boy is craftier than I expected. Mind lending me a hand?" The former headmaster didn't say anything to answer and just raised his spear towards Harry, who protested, "Are you seriously siding with the man who betrayed you? He literally admitted to me that the ritual he told you about is a lie." This was it. The turning point. The moment he'd tried to avoid for months. Now he was running out of time and allies. He couldn't bluff his way out of this one. Not with Dumbledore like this. The young mage was doing his best to try to salvage whatever remained of his plan. To be perfectly honest, he didn't think he could last a long time against the two champions working together. He couldn't exactly overpower them, and Harry's fighting style, which relies on misdirection and layered traps, wouldn't exactly work on multiple opponents of their caliber. It was a long shot at best, and he knew it, but it was a shot worth taking. Dumbledore didn't deny the claim, though, and just stated, "I am aware of Grindelwald's actions. Our fated battle will take place as planned, but that battle cannot begin while you still draw breath, anathema." The word landed like a curse, not enemy, not threat. Anathema, a contradiction, something to be erased. Harry barely had time to process what the former headmaster stated when the man raised his spear towards him, and the world paused. The attack could barely be called magic, not really. The spear didn't glow, it resonated, sending ripples through the fabric of reality like a tuning fork struck against the foundation of existence. The wind stopped, sound fell flat, even Grindelwald paused, unease etched into the flickering lines of his half-formed face. This wasn't just light, it was order, pure, mechanical, absolute, and energy started to gather, spinning very quickly, creating gusts of wind from the sheer pressure alone, and then he let go of it. The gathered energy condensed into a singularity of spiraling brilliance, a beam that spun with impossible precision. The air fractured from the pressure alone, collapsing inwards before it even touched the beam. Wind ceased, gravity bent. Harry couldn't help but be marveled and horrified by the attack. It didn't burn, it froze. Not in temperature, but in principle. Everything it touched stopped existing, locked into a state of absolute equilibrium before simply vanishing. The earth beneath it turned smooth and glass-like, then cracked and shattered into white dust. The skies above pulled back in a spiral, forming a tunnel of utter silence. And it was heading straight for him. The young mage barely had more than a fraction of a second to process the incoming attack, but with a flick of his scythe, he created a subspace, essentially a miniature dimension mirroring the material realm, and used it as a shield, making the attack hit it instead. Harry could feel the miniature realm fracture from the sheer intensity of the attack, and he pushed the entrance of the subspace forward, hoping that it would trap Dumbledore inside it, only for Grindelwald to conjure a ball of darkness, smashing it into prismatic shards that seemed to fluctuate between existence and non-existence. Nevertheless, the young mage persevered and banished the shards of broken space-time towards the Dark Lord. But he didn't have the time to see what happened as he felt Dumbledore suddenly appear behind him in a burst of light. Harry barely dodged the thrust of the light spear on his back, used his scythe to block the following sweep, and spun it. Releasing a breach in space-time that Dumbledore punctured with his weapon, it gave him enough time to warp space and get away. However, the former headmaster didn't let off the pressure, sending a beam of light at him, which Harry conjured a singularity to swallow. He was about to follow with a counterattack, only for Grindelwald to leap out of a shadow, his hand unnaturally elongated, and try to skewer him in the back. The last Potter was barely able to block the attack, followed by creating a portal right in front of Dumbledore's incoming attack, making it hit the Dark Lord instead. Grindelwald's figure screeched unnaturally as it was thrown back by his ally's attack. Suddenly, Harry's arcane hearing warned him about a surge in magic on the ground, and he conjured a magic circle to send himself flying into the air. It seemed to have been the correct choice, as the entire ground turned to a sea of white flames that looked unnaturally still for some reason. Harry made his magic circle physical and stared as Dumbledore seemed to walk on the white fire, manipulated with barely any thought. They stared at one another, silent for what felt to be an eternity. "You're not Dumbledore anymore, are you? The light took that from you when you destroyed Excalibur." The former headmaster's neutral expression shifted slightly at the mention of the sword. "Everything has a price, Potter. I have paid for my mistakes. For my failure, the light took away what made me weak and gave me the opportunity to right my wrongs. The question is, are you prepared to pay the price for your actions?" Damn it, was there even anything left of Dumbledore? The light had obviously decided to take a very heavy-handed approach to get the former headmaster to follow their orders. Harry didn't know if Dumbledore had done so willingly or not, but that took away a lot of the young mage's tricks against the man. Harry had always planned around the older man's motives and dreams. It was what gave him the main advantage, to essentially try to make a victory so bitter that it might as well have been a defeat. But now, this inhuman version of his former headmaster made that very unlikely. Dumbledore had always wanted to kill him, but not like this, not with this intensity. There would be no talking this down. That was what Harry realized, not because of any difference, but because the champion of light could no longer conceptualize not following the light's order. And if the entity wanted Harry dead, there would be nothing to dissuade him. It had to be the spear, Harry realized. It had to have been what the soul magic was doing, essentially morphing Dumbledore into an unbending avatar of the light's will for as long as he wielded it. Now he needed to get rid of the damn thing. Before he could even think of a plan, Harry barely dodged the beam of light that Dumbledore tried to sneakily conjure from his eyes. He ducked and felt it punch a hole in the mountain far behind him. He felt the white flames on the ground rise up and morph into a spike, trying to kill him, and he used his invisibility cloak to phase through them and create a pulse of space, which sent everything flying back. He used the fraction of a second this awarded him to slow down his perception of time and stab his scythe through the flames, channeling the energies of the void between worlds to power a quick transmutation array. In the blink of an eye, the sea of white flames turned into the familiar prismatic, broken shards of space-time, which Harry threw at Dumbledore. Unfortunately, the Light Lord was able to vanish them all before touching him and sent a beam of energy towards Harry, probably expecting him to redirect it. He didn't. Instead, he pushed the prismatic blade of his scythe forward and channeled it down towards the runes that he'd been secretly conjuring, hidden using Solomon's magic, which would specifically destabilize any energy cast with the same signature as the power source. For a fraction of a second, the light around Dumbledore dimmed slightly, and Harry created a portal, extending his scythe through it, hoping to kill Dumbledore, only for a shadow hand to appear out of nowhere and conjure another blade to stop the attack, with the former headmaster raising his own spear in defense as well. The explosion, as all three weapons touched one another, rang into their very soul, creating a pulse of energy that literally sent everyone flying. In mid-air, Harry did his best to activate the second layer of his trap, conjuring chains that grabbed all of the debris and sent them at his opponents. He landed with a roll and started to sing. This time, it wasn't a realm, more of a subspace, a mirror dimension, really, that was small enough that he could tweak the rules. He slowed down the passage of time and slowly sucked the heat from inside. Like he expected, this didn't last for long. The subspace started to crack from their sheer combined strength. Holding one of them was technically doable, even if it was extremely difficult, But both of them at the same time were beyond Harry. In the blink of an eye, the spear of light appeared in front of him, and Harry parried it with his scythe but felt a small cut just below his shoulder. He felt weaker, slower, the moment he got hurt. Holy shit, was that the spear's soul magic? It was essentially absorbing life force somehow. He barely had any time to process that, as his arcane hearing warned him of Grindelwald trying to attack him from the back. Harry instinctively conjured another blade on the lower end of his scythe and used it to block that attack, spinning it while warping space around him to make it move faster. Harry phased through the second attack with his invisibility cloak and instead conjured a singularity right above them, which his two opponents negated while giving him space. But Harry had added a small caveat to it, which would open a breach in space-time when it was negated. From the created breach, a gigantic meteorite appeared just a few feet above them and fell to the ground, without giving them enough time to retaliate. Harry himself had turned himself into a raven and flew away to safety, having warped space just before, to get far enough away not to get hit with his attack. The explosion was massive, but Harry saw the giant projectile almost cut into 4 pieces with a slice of light and dark. Just a fraction of a second before it hit, the floating dust turned into a black cloud of pure destruction that threatened to swallow everything it touched. But Harry contained it by conjuring a small breach to a vacuum which sucked it all away. This left all 3 combatants staring at one another for a moment, but it felt like an eternity. Then suddenly, Dumbledore turned to Grindelwald, who nodded, and then the world shifted. Harry felt it before he saw it. His arcane hearing screamed, not in warning, but in inevitability. The very concept of magic twisted as 2 impossibilities began to converge. Light and dark, order and entropy, creation and destruction. It should have been a paradox. 2 enemies, eternal opposites, whose very nature rejected one another. But now they acted in concert, and the result was something that should never have existed. The sky itself recoiled. Dumbledore raised his spear once more, the light gathering, not in a burst, but in a spiral, refined, focused, calm. At the same time, Grindelwald opened his palm, and darkness spilt out like ink bleeding through reality, wrapping around the gathering order like a parasite that knew exactly how to live within its host. The 2 forces didn't repel, they merged, folding into one another like coiled wires, creating a singular massive spiral of absolute contradiction. It spun with the mathematical perfection of the light, every curve sharpened by divine precision, but beneath that structure swam the hunger of the dark, flickering with madness, decay, and endless endings, and it was coming straight for him. His magic whispered in fear, his will screamed in defiance, and beneath it all he was smiling. After all, an idea bloomed in his mind. It was the first true idea he had had since Dumbledore arrived, beyond fighting for as long as possible, while hoping for the best. Now things were different. Harry Potter had a plan, and well, that rarely tended to bode well for his enemies. 455, Chapter 455, Path to Victory. 21st June, 1995, Nurmengard. It was the first true idea he had had since Dumbledore arrived, beyond fighting for as long as possible while hoping for the best. Now things were different. Harry Potter had a plan, and well, that rarely tended to bode well for his enemies. Harry watched as the spiral of ordered destruction flew towards him, and despite the stakes of his fight, despite the danger the attack posed, he had to admit that it was a very impressive piece of magic. Or could it even be called magic anymore? It was more like a combined dimensional attack, essentially a fragment of the lights and the dark's might themselves, something that no one, not even previous champions, had done before. Yet, despite the intensity of the attack, Harry had to admit that the combination of 2 completely opposing forces into something greater was inspired. The light and dark had been enemies for eons, and their energies reflected that, but for that energy to use this hatred to enhance the potency of the attack was beyond impressive, but it also provided an opportunity. He was tempted to use his invisibility cloak and phase through it, but his crest warmed up, telling him that taking this attack head-on was probably a bad idea, and instead he did something slightly reckless. With a swipe of his scythe, he opened a breach to the void between worlds and let the chaos through it. The spiral of ordered destruction met pure chaos, and the world held its breath. The light gave order to chaos, and the dark slowly consumed it, as it inched closer and closer towards the source of the breach, closing it. Yet this gave Harry time to prepare for his second part of the attack, creating a pulse of space-time that spread rainbow fractals as it traversed the battlefield. The pulse destabilized the incoming spell, not by fighting it head-to-head, but by using the very small amount of lingering chaos to make it so the energies of the light and dark essentially forget their collaboration. After all, it was their nature to fight one another. Just like that, the spell attacked itself, collapsing into a concentration of magic that warped everything around it, ending in an explosion that disintegrated everything it touched, either through the dark's destruction or the light's sheer stillness. And wasn't that a good metaphor for the light and the dark's alliance? It was powerful, yet would turn on one another with just the right bit of chaos, which Harry was planning on fully taking advantage of. The young mage stood there, his cloak waving from the wind of the explosion, looking back at Grindelwald and Dumbledore, who were completely still, likely not having expected Harry to survive the attack. Of course, it didn't take long until they followed up on their own attacks. His arcane hearing warned him that someone would attack him from the back, and he dodged the slices of shadows coming his way, followed by the spikes of light ahead. He warped space around him as a blade of darkness almost skewered him, only for it to hit Dumbledore instead. The champion of the light glared and released a burning attack with his eyes, which Harry redirected by opening a small portal in front of him, making it disintegrate Grindelwald's torso. As expected, the Dark Lord regenerated without any issues, and Harry released a pulse of space to send them flying back. He conjured a magic circle beneath his feet, sending him flying up, before turning into a raven and landing in a safer place. Expecting that they'd attack him, Harry opened a portal to the bottom of the ocean near Antarctica, letting jets of freezing cold come at blinding speeds due to the extremely high pressure. His two enemies barely had time to dodge the attack, conjuring shields that redirected the incoming jets. Harry froze them with a pulse of magic, sucking up their heat, which he used to power a small running array that made the newly frozen water morph into blades and start attacking them. However, in a pulse of light, the portal shut down, the ice melted completely, and it was time for Harry to be on the defensive. Grindelwald created chains of destruction that tried to bind Harry, who used his invisibility cloak to phase through them. He used his scythe to cut through them with a single slice, having warped space to make it hit all of them, but he grabbed the remnants of the dark energy with the tip of his weapon and used it to create a fractal cutter at Dumbledore, who blocked it with his spear. However, when it was blocked, it resulted in an explosion of the absorbed dark energy, sending him flying back. That left Harry to deal with the furious Grindelwald, who growled in anger and started to swallow the shadows all over the battlefield, growing into a gigantic black dragon with glowing red eyes. Harry rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and leapt back just in time to avoid a wing beat that shattered the earth beneath him. Harry saw the Grindelwald's form drag tendrils of darkness like oil across the water with his every movement, corroding anything it touched. The young mage prepared to set up an attack, a way to destabilize Grindelwald's new form, only for him to dodge a spear of light coming at him from Dumbledore, who had recovered from Harry's attack. The champion of light raised his hand, and a halo of spears, dozens of them, all miniature replicas of his own, manifested in a perfect circle behind him. A single gesture sent them flying, piercing the air in coordinated formation. Harry used his invisibility cloak to phase through the barrage and grabbed the last spear with his scythe, sending it flying with a pulse of space, enhanced with just a bit of power from the resurrection stone towards the dark dragon's opening maw. Right as he was about to release the black entropic fire he'd been gathering for the previous few seconds. The spear exploded, its light fighting off Grindelwald's darkness. And yet, Harry didn't have time to celebrate as he ducked under Dumbledore's thrusting spear, which had cut his calves, its soul magic draining him once more. Damn it, he couldn't risk being hit with that thing again. Harry conjured a wall of black ice that Dumbledore just destroyed with a casual flick of his hand, only for the ice to freeze in mid-air during the explosion, where chunks of ice, a few as large as a fist, and other practically microscopic, stayed there frozen in time, enhanced by the resurrection stone. Dumbledore gasped as he mistakenly got through him, and dozens of cuts started to form on his body, including one extremely close to his eyes. Harry, though, used the invisibility cloak to phase through them and attacked Dumbledore with his scythe. The former headmaster dodged out of the way, but ended up getting a deep cut in his chest instead of a killing blow, and yet, while he moved, he ended up getting cut from dozens of small ice shards. He growled and released a pulse of light, overwhelming the enchanted ice and disintegrating it, and Harry used this time to conjure runes, in conjunction with Solomon's magic, to discreetly absorb as much of this energy as possible. Right as he was about to renew his attack once more, he noticed Grindelwald's dragon form getting out of the shadows next to him, hoping to trap him in the moors, only for Harry to use the stored light released and turn it into a beam of light that attacked him right as he neared. Light and dark met violently, and it was explosive. Harry hadn't expected the detonation. He thought the attack would stagger Grindelwald, maybe injure him enough to force a reversion from his draconic form. What he didn't expect was the resulting shockwave to ripple like a giant exploding charm, tearing apart the immediate space around them. The force struck him before he could react. What the hell had Dumbledore put in that attack for it to react like that? He didn't have time to contemplate as the blast sent him hurtling backwards like a ragdoll, crashing through conjured walls, broken earth and warped stone. He finally stopped against a cracked stone, the air knocked from his lungs, blood pooling in his mouth. Grindelwald, for all his size, had been thrown even farther, his draconic form smashing through the distant mountain ridge in a cloud of shadow and fury. Harry groaned, dragging himself upright with his scythe, vision swimming. "Okay," he muttered, "I'll admit, that one's on me." He limped slightly, doing his best to ignore the pain. At a reflex, more than anything, he sang a soft tune, and a small world appeared around him for just a moment. For a fraction of a second, he was surrounded by an endless field of greenery and soft wind flowing around him. He barely noticed that his wounds started to close and that he wasn't limping anymore. And just like that, he stopped singing, and the small reality marble faded away, and instead gave way to the sad sight of Albus Dumbledore looking at him impassively. "You cannot defeat us, anathema. You must have realized that you'll run out of tricks eventually, and all it would take is a single mistake. You cannot win." Harry shook his head, releasing a small chuckle, which morphed into hysterical laughter. "You got it all wrong. Winning, that's what you think this is about. I don't want to win. Believe me, I loathe you with every fiber of my body, but I haven't done any of this because I want to beat you or hurt you. I'm fighting you right now because it's the right thing to do, because what you're doing, what you're planning, is just that abominable." "This is the only path for humanity's survival," Dumbledore growled back. The young mage, on the other hand, groaned, "That's the thing. It isn't. And you can't see that, because that entity whispering in your ears desperately wants Ragnarok to happen. But I know how futile it is to argue with you on the matter, so I won't. I know that fighting both of you will likely not end in my favor. You both regenerate at blinding speeds, and your patrons are giving you more power than you know what to do with, bailing you out whenever you get close to losing. So yeah, maybe it's all useless, but it's the best I can do, and I will keep doing it until it kills me." "You're prepared to die for no reason." Harry grinned. "Not for no reason. It's who I am, and if this is where I fall, then so be it." "Then you will fall," the former headmaster uttered neutrally, raising his spear of light. All right, he bought enough time to get things started a bit with his little speech, and now it was time to follow through. He had bought enough time, and he could tell that his final plan was almost ready to flourish. Dumbledore was ready to attack, and Harry sang. The world turned into fractals, essentially, and Harry saw through 3 versions of himself at once. It was nothing he'd ever done before, but he had essentially superimposed reality into 3 different timelines at once, each one being autonomous. Each one of his versions swung the scythe differently. Dumbledore was able to block one of them with his spear, but 2 got through, cutting through his chest easily. He was about to press further on the attack before the light healed him, only to be attacked by Grindelwald's gigantic form, and he did the stupid thing of running at Dumbledore, phasing through the incoming thrust, and threw the man in general, and used his scythe, combined with space warping, to take the man's army and get the spear to hit the gigantic dragon in the head. It absorbed some magic from Grindelwald's form and even a few from the ritual. Harry suppressed a grin and, with a small sweep of his scythe, got Dumbledore's spear to hit the ground in the exact space he'd been conjuring a small runic array using Solomon's magic, specifically one that he used to freeze time in a certain location, with himself being exempted. Harry was about to follow up with an attack, only for a gigantic black arm to appear from one of the shadows, grab him, and slam him into the ground. Harry was barely able to phase through before the impact and turned into his raven form, escaping. However, right as he was about to leave, everything turned grey. Their surroundings, while destroyed and in a sorry state, still had a hint of nature. Now something seemed to envelop the entire area, and there was absolute silence. Not the silence of anticipation, nor the silence of a battlefield stilled. This was deeper. Harry's breath caught in his throat as pressure settled onto his shoulders. Suddenly the world was divided, not through distance but essence. To his left, light. Unbending, blinding, a realm forged in rules and absolute order. The sky there gleamed white, no clouds, no sun, just presence. The ground was smooth and unmarred, a polished marble of certainty where every breath felt judged. To his right, darkness, not mere shadow, but the absence of anything comprehensible. The landscape devoured meaning, with angles that bent wrong and skies that wept ash. It was entropy made manifest. Harry quickly realized what it was. After all, it was his speciality. Somehow, Dumbledore and Grindelwald worked together to impose their will on reality, essentially warping it into a mixture of the manifestation between the light and dark. And in a matter of seconds, each one of them conjured an immense beam of light and dark and sent it flying towards Harry. He couldn't phase through the attacks. It would exhaust him far quicker, given that he'd not only need to use the cloak, but also overcome the rules that Dumbledore and Grindelwald imposed on reality. Seeing no other way, Harry used his scythe and created a subspace to block the attack, only for it to be torn through in seconds. Yet it was these seconds that gave Harry time to sing. A small realm appeared in front of him like a dome, which alleviated the imposing feeling he had. It blocked both attacks, but it was obviously fracturing. And so, he layered another realm beneath it, and then another. Each one was different. A realm of stone and flame, a realm of storm and song, a realm of silence where sound couldn't exist. Dozens of them, stacked like plates of glass, each bending the attacks ever so slightly, each fragmenting the overwhelming pressure just enough for him to survive. But survival came at a price. Each realm, when shattered, didn't simply vanish, it collapsed inward. And the backlash slammed into Harry like a freight train of raw metaphysical force. He stumbled with every destruction, his lungs burning, ribs cracking, magic circuits screaming. His vision blurred and his hands trembled. Still, he endured. He bit down on the pain, forcing himself to stay upright, forcing his hand to tighten around the scythe's haft. Because he wasn't wasting that energy. He was storing it. The scythe drank deep from the destruction, its fractal edge pulsing, shimmering with wild light and void-touched shadow. He screamed as the last realm shattered, the sound raw, primal, part agony, part defiance. And then, with one final breath, he swung. The scythe cut the imposed realm like a scalpel through rotting flesh. It didn't slice terrain, it sliced meaning. The entire constructed space fractured, breaking into cascading shards of logic, color, rule, and reality. Fractals exploded outwards, blooming like broken glass reflecting 1,000 worlds, and then it detonated. And Harry stood at the center of it all, his body barely able to hold on, using his scythe to keep himself up at best, and yet the world was back to normal. He suppressed the urge to groan when Dumbledore and Grindelwald appeared, moments later, looking relatively unharmed. It seemed he couldn't delay it as much as possible. He to activate his plan right away. Grindelwald gave him a vicious look and grinned. "You should have accepted my deal, boy." Suddenly, Dumbledore thrust his spear into Harry's chest, and the young mage didn't have time to move away, his body slowly being consumed by light before turning into ash. Or at least it would have if Harry hadn't used his remaining magic, which he'd been readying since the fight began, creating a temporal clone of himself. Essentially a puppet he commanded in the last moment while he hid using his invisibility cloak. It could have been detected if his opponents were specifically listening for temporal anomalies, but Harry's last attack meant that there were a lot of them happening anyway. After all, this was the plan. Harry wasn't lying when he said that this wasn't about winning against them. It had taken him minutes to realize that he wasn't going to do it. Not when they were supported by the light and dark. This was always about buying as much time as he could, and now that he was spent, he needed another alternative. It wasn't hard. With their common enemy dead, Grindelwald and Dumbledore, as expected, turned towards one another, each one ready to attack, and that suited Harry just fine. After all, if his enemies were ready to do his job, then why would he stop them? 456. Chapter 456, Dreams and Principles. 21st of June, 1995, Nurmengard. It wasn't hard. With their common enemy dead, Grindelwald and Dumbledore, as expected, turned towards one another, each one ready to attack, and that suited Harry just fine. After all, if his enemies were ready to do his job, then why would he stop them? Albus Dumbledore felt the world clear up slightly as he finally realized what had happened. It had been like a fog had just been lifted from his mind, giving him a small sense of clarity. The light's imposing thoughts, which he hadn't even noticed were almost piloting his body so far, just slipped away slightly, likely feeling relief as Harry Potter was dead. The former headmaster could barely believe it. Harry Potter was dead. He had dreamt of this moment for years now, that the troublesome boy who had cost him so much with his interference was finally gone. He had put up a good fight, an impressive display even. It had taken both him and Grindelwald essentially imposing their wills on the material realm, fully manifesting the light and dark, together to finally finish him off. They couldn't have even done it without Dumbledore's spear acting as a channel, as a fragment of the light to enhance his will, and Grindelwald's body was essentially made of the dark's energy, allowing him to channel even more power through it. For the first time in centuries, the champions of light and dark worked together, and they did so out of desperation to kill a boy who hadn't even gotten to his owl year and wasn't that bit pathetic. Sure, the boy had obviously been fate's chosen champion for the greatest prophecy ever made since the dawn of time. It was the only reason why his schemes, his far-reaching plans, somehow worked. It had taken their full power, enhanced to their peaks, to do the deed. And even then, it had to be coupled with the fact that fate's grasp on reality was temporarily halted due to Excalibur's destruction and the frankly insane amount of magic that their ritual was utilizing, which stopped the entity from protecting each champion. And to make things worse, the boy had somehow held his own. Albus looked at what remained of Nurmengard, what had been Grindelwald's masterpiece once, his pride and joy, and all that remained was ash and destruction. Yes, Harry Potter definitely did not go down quietly. In the privacy of his mind, Albus would always fear what would have happened if they had waited for him to grow older and more experienced. The former headmaster remembered seeing the boy arriving for his first day at Hogwarts. He had honestly forgotten about him, besides being Lily Evans's son, and a potential way to manipulate Voldemort's prophecy. Sure, his sorting into Slytherin had been something of a surprise, but it wasn't that big of a deal. After all, it was just a schoolhouse, and the boy wasn't a priority. To be honest, from his teacher's report, the boy was obviously a scholar at heart, and Albus thought that he should have gone to Ravenclaw, that he should have just capitulated. Dumbledore realized how wrong he was when he crossed wands with the boy. His entire method of fighting was based on traps and illusions. Each attack was always a part of a stronger sequence, like a string in a tapestry, woven as a strategy. He was brilliant, there was no doubt about it, and the way he fought reflected that. Fate or not, prophecy or not, the boy had given them a fight to remember, and the mere thought of a stronger or craftier Harry Potter just made him shiver. As if it were agreeing to his argument, the light's relenting a bit of its influence showed just how much it had wanted the boy dead. It made sense. The boy was the first person who actually almost killed the light, and that sort of mind and talent was terrifying. After all, if he came this close on his first try, leaving him alive came with the risk of his succeeding the next time. Still, despite having channeled the light many times over his life, he had never felt so completely out of control, and it was terrifying. He could feel himself being slowly overwhelmed by the spear as the light seeped into his soul, making it more rigid, more orderly. It was overwhelming, and just to take a breather, he impaled it to the ground and stared at his oldest friend, Gellert. The champion of the dark slowly morphed its form, turning slightly into a mimicry of flesh and blood. "Hello, Albus. That's a nice weapon you got here. I have to admit that I didn't see it coming. Given the state of Nurmengard and what you turned yourself into, there are many things that you didn't see coming," the former headmaster retorted. "I suppose you're right. That boy really was more of a handful than I expected. I haven't been this outplayed in a very long time, maybe ever. I expected that without fate's protection, getting rid of him would have been easy. He was more prepared than I expected." Albus gave him a deadpan look. Gellert had just lost an army of vampires, warriors who had been alive for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Elder vampires were known to be army killers, with countless massacres to each of their names, well recorded in history, essentially unkillable, unharmable. Sure, the boy's use of soul magic had helped a lot, and his weeping angels were uniquely made to fight them in the darkness, slaughtering them like cattle. In the end, Dumbledore's and Grindelwald's great army was made up of just the two of them. Oh, sure, they could wipe out cities easily and overpower entire armies, but that wasn't the point. Still, Gellert was obviously trying to buy some time to activate the ritual, and so Albus brought up the issue. "You betrayed me, Gellert. Have I now?" The ritual was never meant to save humanity, just a fraction of it. "You lied to me. You wished to ascend as a god, leaving me with the Muggles to deal with Ragnarök, while you rule over a small realm like a petty god." Gellert sneered in response. "I have never said that we'd save humanity, Albus. I always said that we'd save our world, our people, our culture, not theirs." Looking back at their conversations, Albus had to admit that Gellert had never directly confirmed this, but had changed the subject, or made a vague enough statement that Albus made his own logical assumptions. "This isn't a court of law, Gellert. Even if you hadn't said it directly, you knew exactly what you alluded to. You broke my trust, and you know it," Albus growled. "You would doom billions of people, and for what? So that you'd have a little realm to rule over. Don't you have enough power? Aren't you already a god in everything but name?" "This has nothing to do with power, Albus. This is about protecting our people. The Muggles are a true threat to magic, and I saw a way to separate us from them, nothing more." "We've had this argument before, Gellert," the former headmaster answered back. "You cannot punish an entire people and commit genocide for actions that they haven't taken yet. Your visions are not absolute. Your failure here is proof of that. It's funny how you judge me while you haven't seen what I've seen. I haven't seen our people wiped out, Albus. I didn't see a war. That would have been merciful at least. It would have been an honorable end. No, our people were not killed. They were enslaved and turned into nothing more than tools and weapons. Children were born and indoctrinated with the sole purpose of serving a role for the Muggles, and they would know nothing more than that. They wouldn't be part of society, just one more asset for the Muggles to use against one another. Is this what you saw as our people's fate? Is this what you think magic's legacy should be like? For thousands of years, we have fought and bled for humanity, and we ended up being hunted for it. We hid, but it was a temporary measure, and now we cannot hide. Is it truly that abhorrent that I do not wish to save the people who wish to wipe out mine?" Albus had to admit that Gellert had a point there. In his older years, he had kept a bit of an eye on their progress, and his old friend's rants, which had seemed nonsensical decades prior, started to make more sense. He had a few plans in place to deal with it, but most of them required a united magical world. If his plans for Britain had worked, and so did the expansion in Europe, he could have managed something. He would have likely brought them to an empty place, hidden under thousands of enchantments and away from any Muggle devices. He'd have assured its privacy and that of isolated magical locations with a network of Fidelius charms, and the rest of the world would have followed him. He could have even used the Muggles as a way to get the rest of the world to join him, to make himself a paragon of protection against them. It would have been his final masterpiece, his greatest achievement, his final goal, and it would have been far more merciful than full extermination. But he had to abandon it when his plans for Britain fell through, and him being busy with Ragnarok, which changed everything. And so Albus argued back, Muggles need infrastructure to grow. The result of Ragnarok would have crippled their progress and gave Magekind more than enough time to assert their dominance. Refusing to save them from an apocalypse that we arranged is the same as killing them. Do not pretend that you have no hands in this. This is why I didn't tell you. You've always lacked vision, always clung to your precious light like some lost duckling. What do you think would have happened after Ragnarok ended? Did you think that the light or the dark would have left humanity alone? No, they would be enslaved by the winner if they ever returned to Midgard. This was always going to happen, and all we did was make sure that it happened on our terms. I gave our people a way out, in another realm, a chance at safety and freedom. There was enough energy for the rest of humanity, the former headmaster retorted heatedly. Energy that you're planning on using to ascend. Say that we save the Muggles, say that I bring them to my realm, free of the light or the dark. What makes you think that the Muggles wouldn't rise again the same way? They have before. Eventually there won't be a champion of light or dark to protect them, and they'll fall. They need protection. They need guidance. They need me. Silence reigned at Grindelwald's proclamation, and if he was honest with himself, Albus had to admit that he didn't know what to say about that. His old friend always had a silver tongue of some sort. It was how he swayed nations into following him in his foolish war all those decades ago. It was hard to argue with him when he obviously wished for the best for Magekind, but the cruelty of this path stopped Albus from entertaining his words any further. It was close, the absolute decimation of billions of lives, just minutes away at the most, and no matter how much Gellert tried to argue it, no matter how much Albus had fallen, he had to admit that this was just wrong. Gellert must have seen the advantage and continued, "It's a beautiful weapon, what you have, and a terrifying one at that. The light did a very good job crafting it, especially the soul magic. Absolute stillness, the ultimate order of the light, given to a spear, capable of usurping anything connected to a sword, like, for example, a ritual channeled through one. It's crafted exactly for this moment, for me, but I can see what it's doing to your soul, infecting it slowly, unmaking it. You are dying. You have been dying since you grasped that cursed weapon. No, it's worse than that. You're being erased, mind, body, and soul." Albus nodded. "I have. I can feel the light overwhelming me, slowly morphing my soul into a rigid thing, taking out what it thinks are my imperfections. I look at the world and see nothing but imperfections that need to be purified, and I resist the urge to do so. This was the price for my failure, one that I gladly paid. You're dying too. You barely have a body now, if you can call it that. Your soul will change irrevocably if you activate that ritual. You're right. I can feel the dark pushing against me, getting louder with every moment, urging me to destroy everything. It's funny, isn't it? The end of the world hasn't begun, and yet we're both dying. No matter the victor, it all ends the same. If I win and activate the ritual, you'll die. If you win and usurp my ritual, we'll both die. So why fight? Why bother? I bother because of my dreams, because of my principles. You believe that Muggles would inevitably turn against mages. I believe that we cannot judge a new world before it even exists. I believe that humanity, mages and Muggles alike, will learn to coexist, especially given the hardship that they'll all face, in a completely new environment." "Ever the optimist, Albus," Grindelwald retorted with a sneer on his face. "And you are a pessimist, Gellert?" Grindelwald chuckled, but there was no joy in the sound, only weariness wrapped in mockery. "Perhaps, but pessimism keeps people alive. Optimism makes them martyrs. Tell me, Albus, how many died for your hope? How many children, how many innocents, followed your bright ideals of a magical utopia only to find nothing but death and darkness?" Albus didn't flinch, but it was a close thing. "And how many were butchered for your fears? How many futures did you see? How many times have you manipulated the strands of time and fate to get things to happen exactly like you want? These people that you say you want to protect, you decide for them. You reshape the world for them as if their choices were irrelevant. Because they are, Grindelwald snapped. You think they'll choose rightly when the time comes? They never do. Give them the option between hard truth and easy delusion, and they will choose the lie every time. I've seen it. So I make the choice for them. I save them without their consent, and I will keep guiding them until the end of time. That is mercy. Is that what you say to yourself? Is that how you justify yourself, how you manipulate everything around you like strings? Do you even see us as people anymore? You manipulated me, I see that now. You played me like a fiddle, building on my fears, on my past, putting me into a position that would push me more and more to your corner, forcing me to commit one atrocity after another, losing my own autonomy, and using your divination to say the perfect words, to take the perfect actions, just to make me join you. By the light, maybe I would have joined you properly, with my own decisions, and I would have been happy to walk with you to the end. But you took away my autonomy, you took away my choice, just like you're planning on doing for Magekind. So no, Gellert, that's not mercy. This is fear. Yours. And you've been driven by it for so long that you can't even see the world without it anymore. It's why you used your divination to convince me, in fear that I'd refuse. It's why you hid your true purpose, because you feared this argument. It's why we need to fight. Because, alive or not, right or wrong, I cannot leave the fate of the wizarding world in your hands. Albus was yelling by the end, and Gellert's new crimson eyes slowly looked solemn. So, battle it is. I have killed thousands of people in my life. I have never regretted a single one of them, because every death had a purpose, had a goal, for the greater good of the magical world. I think yours will be the most painful. I wonder if I'll regret it. You've taken your last life, the former headmaster stated, taking back his impaled spear and wielding it, ready to attack his opponent. Shadows started to grow around Grindelwald, and he answered clearly, "No, you've lived your last day." 457. Chapter 457, Ragnarok. 21st June, 1995, Nurmengard. You've taken your last life, the former headmaster stated, taking back his impaled spear and wielding it, ready to attack his opponent. Shadows started to grow around Grindelwald, and he answered clearly, "No, you've lived your last day." The world stood still as both combatants stared at one another, each one waiting for the other to make a move. Albus knew deep down that it was always going to come to this, a fight to the death between him and Gellert. Ever since his victory decades prior, he knew deep down that his fight with his old friend would not end. The Dark Lord was not one to go gently into that good night. He would prefer to die kicking and screaming, with his head held high, on the battlefield than in a cell alone and forgotten. Even if he had always hoped that their rematch wouldn't happen, that Gellert would see his way one day, or at least remain imprisoned until Albus's plans came to fruition. And yet, the moment he decided to spare his former friend, the moment he thought that by containing him he would have prevented another champion of the dark from rising, he had made this inevitable. He could see that now, even if he had denied it before. And now it was time to fix this error in judgment. With a yell, Albus thrust the spear forward, asking the light to condense into a spiral of absolute stilling, a way to destroy anything through purification and order. A gigantic beam of light appeared and raced towards Grindelwald, who decided to actually meet the attack firsthand, summoning the darkness into a beam. Darkness met light in a gigantic pulse of energy, vaporizing almost everything in sight and carving a gigantic crater into the ground. Both seemed equally powerful until Albus summoned a pulse of light with his sword, enhancing his attack, slowly making it inch towards his enemy. Albus had the advantage in terms of raw power. The light spear allowed him to channel more potent energy than Gellert's corrupted body ever could. Unfortunately for Albus, raw power very rarely came into effect in duels. Grindelwald's beam of darkness morphed into a gigantic clawed hand, which grabbed Albus's attack and redirected it towards the ground, creating another crater in the ground due to the explosion. When the dust settled, Albus barely had time to use his spear to parry the clawed black hand that appeared from his own shadow, trying to kill him. He retaliated with a burst of light energy, which vaporized any entity of the dark near him. He heard some hissing and saw Gelert's body rebuilding itself, likely due to the attack. Albus took advantage of this by conjuring a gigantic mist that started to cover the entire battlefield. The mist wasn't just for cover, it was a reflection field. Light bounced unnaturally through it, bent not by mirrors, but by sheer will, forming fractured angles and disjointed images that looped upon themselves. Grindelwald's eyes narrowed, recognizing the tactic too late. Albus raised his spear, and a pulse of order cascaded outward, refracting endlessly within the mist. Hundreds, no, thousands of hard light constructs burst forth from the reflections, raining down like spears forged from judgment itself. The Dark Lord weaved between them, his form unraveling into shadows, but the light followed. Until he obviously had had enough, and black clouds started to gather in the sky, destabilizing the origin of the attack. Nevertheless, just as Albus prepared to deal with another attack, he felt something gather in the clouds before a gigantic attack seemed to come from the sky and smite him with darkness. The former headmaster barely conjured a light shield to protect himself, and the shockwave seemed to travel back and cut a nearby mountain in half. Albus then moved with a surprising nimbleness for a man his age and rolled away, dodging the extended spear of darkness that almost impaled him. He parried it with his spear and countered by conjuring a wave of light towards its source. However, he didn't see Gelert's attack, which appeared from the shadow, trying to impale him. He barely shielded against it, out of instinct more than anything else, but the impact of the shield shattering sent him flying back. Thankfully, Albus used the spear to stabilize himself in midair and created an impromptu alchemical circle that channeled the light into the ground, and then used it to conjure a white fire that spread all around him. Gelert's incoming form was almost swallowed by it, only for the Dark Lord to have conjured a shield of darkness, stopping it and then releasing his own darkness, negating Albus's alchemically modified territory and sending a sneak attack from a shadow. And yet Dumbledore didn't dodge it. As the attack flew at him, he simply channeled a lot of magic suddenly into the spear, making it extend at blinding speed, impaling Grindelwald in the gut, while taking a hit that would have atomized anything with a pulse. He suppressed the urge to yell in pain as he felt the shadow spear impale him in the gut, trying to spread its destructive influence, only for the light to banish it away with barely any thought. Gelert winced and growled, his inhuman voice returning, and he turned into a shadow and sent a small wave of darkness at him that Albus split apart easily. When the battlefield stilled, Gelert had reformed his body, looking healed, and yet he was not. He was lesser. This was a direct hit by Albus's spear, which absorbed a fragment of the energy in his soul and a fragment of the ritual. However, Albus's own injury healed in seconds as well, channeled through the spear, and yet he still felt affected, his soul specifically. It felt more rigid, more subsumed with the light. While he had hurt Grindelwald, relying on the spear to heal him just to land a hit wasn't something he could keep doing, not without accelerating his own soul's destruction. He needed to secure humanity's future before he could afford to do that. Still, the former headmaster looked at his former friend, who was glaring at him. "We both know that my victory is inevitable here, Gelert. I can heal from your attacks, while you still suffer from mine. Eventually, I will absorb the ritual's energy and your soul with it. I can heal from your attacks." Gelert was a logical man. He had to be to survive being such a powerful seer. He should have realized that at the moment he was at a disadvantage. His greatest strength was always his ability to wield divination in battle, countering spells that hadn't even been cast yet, and slowly maneuvering his enemies into a corner before defeating them. Now, even as their power was far higher than it ever was before, his greatest strength was gone. It had to be for their plan to work in the first place, and that made Albus's weapon the only viable trump card in the fight, the only way that guaranteed that their fight didn't end in a stalemate, with each side endlessly regenerating. And yet, despite the logic of being outmatched, Gelert didn't relent. Instead, he growled, "Oh, Albus, you can't lock up the darkness." Just like that, his crimson eyes glowed and the world erupted into a burst of darkness, with Grindelwald manifesting his will into reality, warping it into a mockery of the dark. Dumbledore did the same, manifesting the light and cancelling out the attack, only to be met with a wave of purple fire. Thankfully, Dumbledore was able to redirect the blast by creating a shield of light, and yet the hasty shield broke from the pressure of the attack, sending him flying back. While in mid-air, Albus released wild arcs of stillness, golden energies that literally unmade the darkness around them, before using his spear to right himself in the air and standing with a stance ready to be attacked once more. As the darkness faded, Albus noticed that a gigantic dragon stood where Gellert's form used to be, its crimson eyes glowing with the same intensity, the same rage that had always been hidden in his old friend's heart, even before they grew apart. The dragon flew in the air and dived towards him, and Albus conjured hundreds of light spikes at him, only for him to shrug them off completely. Right as he was about to be hit, Albus turned himself into light and appeared up in the sky, waving his spear in complicated patterns, with traces of light remaining with every swing. The light solidified into the shape of a gigantic eagle, with Dumbledore in its heart, which flew at blinding speeds towards the dragon, who roared in acceptance. Albus accelerated himself suddenly into a parody of light, his construct catching Grindelwald's dragon form in a surprise, sending them all flying away through a mountain miles away, while extending his spear to impale Grindelwald while in mid-air. However, while in the middle of the attack, Gellert bent his serpentine neck at just the right angle to breathe a beam of concentrated plasma that was enhanced with the destructive energies of the dark. It took Albus completely by surprise, and he barely managed to tilt away from the attack. It wasn't enough to be completely unharmed since he was still hit by the attack, but enough for it to be manageable. Still, the eagle construct was destabilized, and Albus was sent flying back while Grindelwald crashed into a mountain. The former headmaster slowly raised his spear into the air. Light started to gather into the cloud as if a new sun had been born into the sky. It channeled itself into a single point, blinding, radiant, absolute. Then Albus's hand tightened on his spear, and the light answered. The gathered energy lanced down from the heavens, a colossal pillar of stillness that shattered sound, time, and thought. It wasn't just magic. It was the concept of judgment made manifest, a decree of unmaking from the light itself. The beam struck the mountain where Grindelwald had fallen, and everything, stone, shadow, memory, was erased. Not destroyed, erased. The mountain didn't crumble, it vanished. The ground didn't shake, it ceased. For a moment, it was as if that part of the world had never existed. No ash, no ruin, only absence. But Grindelwald was not so easily undone. He appeared from one of the shadows, looking more like a beast than a man. At least 20 feet tall, his body radiated waves of suffocating pressure, his form forged of twisting smoke and shadow, barely holding together, a thing of pure malice and intent. His limbs burned with black flames, eyes glowing crimson. Wings stretched wide behind him, made of layered darkness that bled tendrils with every movement. And in his hand he held a blade, long, jagged, pulsating with destruction, like a wound carved into the world and kept open. Albus took a breath. His ribs creaked from the last exchange, but the light moved through him still. His bleeding body began to stitch itself back together, and his skin reformed through his patron's grace. Yet, as his wounds closed, something within him frayed. His thoughts felt slower, cleaner, not by clarity, but by removal. He could feel the light chipping away at what made him human, smoothing out the imperfections until there was nothing left but an instrument, followed by nothingness. Still he stood, and when Grindelwald surged forward all wings and fury and weight, Albus met him without hesitation. The dark blade swung, wide and brutal, tearing the air apart with its sheer presence. Albus parried with his spear, their weapons crashing with no sound, just a flare of force that rippled across the battlefield and forced the air to split. The impact sent cracks spidering beneath their feet, which spread further than Albus could tell. The champion of the light used some of the debris to transfigure into chains that would inconvenience Grindelwald, and yet the champion of the dark moved through them as if they didn't exist, and followed through with another attack, and this time Dumbledore spun to meet him, spear clashing in blinding arcs that turned the world to blurs of gold and black. And then, without warning, Albus reversed his grip, slammed the spear into the ground, and activated the magic stored within. The weapon extended. It launched him upward like a beam of light, his body arcing into the sky. And mid-flight, the light answered again. Wings unfolded from his back, vast, angular, impossibly sharp, glowing with an intensity that made the storm clouds part around him. Then he dove, faster than thought, than sound, than sense. The sky itself bent around him as he descended, spear angled forward, golden threads spiraling behind him like a comet. And Grindelwald rose to meet him. They collided in mid-air, not like men, but like storms, chaos and judgment meeting at blinding speeds. Light howled as it carved the sky apart, raw beams of judgment flashing like divine lightning. Darkness shook, collapsing and reforming around Grindelwald's monstrous frame. They struck again and again, each blow sending tremors through the clouds, each parry shattering the air, ripping through the atmosphere with the weight of opposing truths. Dumbledore didn't hesitate. He spun mid-air, his wings beating once with enough force to clear the ash and cloud, and brought down his spear like a falling star. Grindelwald countered with his jagged blade of corrupted shadow, and the two magics met in a collision that didn't just shake the earth, it changed it. The battlefield broke, valleys cracked open, ridges buckled. The crater beneath them deepened, no longer carved by stone, but by will. The trees at the edge of the horizon caught fire from the shockwave alone. The world tilted under the weight of their clash, trying and failing to hold their power. And then Dumbledore struck. He turned himself into pure light, into pure energy, and broke his enemy's blade suddenly. The impact was bright enough to blind the very sky. Albus used this opportunity to push himself further, and with a final thrust of his spear, its glowing having intensified even further, he pierced through Grindelwald's chest. There was no scream, just silence. Stillness spread. It wasn't death, it was erasure. Darkness unraveled from the point of contact outward, breaking down Grindelwald's monstrous body like paper dissolving in flame. Wings, claws, fangs, all of it turned to ash and dust before vanishing entirely. But he didn't die. The darkness gathered again, slowly pulling together, reforming with effort, with pain, with defiance. Grindelwald's shape took form once more, smaller, more human, his body looking like a mimicry of flesh. Dumbledore stood before him, hovering slightly, his wings of light tattered and flickering, his robes drenched in blood, his breathing shallow. The spear remained in his hand, steady, unwavering, and it was pointed at Grindelwald's heart. He spoke up with finality in his tone. "Surrender now. We both know how this ends." "You still don't have the guts to kill me, do you?" Grindelwald answered while chuckling bitterly. "This isn't about killing you, Gellert. This is about undoing you. The spear will literally wipe out your soul as it takes the ritual. Don't you understand, Gellert? I wish I could kill you, I really could, because the alternative is so much worse. And you want me to just give you my life's ambition, the key to saving my people?" Albus nodded solemnly. "Are you so bitter that you would make me give you a fate worse than death? The outcome is the same. It's whether or not you have a soul that would change things." The former headmaster expected the Dark Lord to be bitter, to yell and rage, before seeing the logic, the mercy that Albus was offering, especially given his betrayal. Instead, Gellert started to laugh. There wasn't any bitterness in it, just pure hysterical laughter, and he knelt up, smiling at him. "Do you not think I have planned for this? Do you think that I haven't learned from our duel all those years ago? No, I learned from my mistakes, and one of them was not planning for defeat. I knew perfectly well that there was a chance that I'd lose, that something would happen, that fate would help you, as it did in our previous fight. This time it was this spear, practically the only weapon capable of stopping me. But no, not this time. Not like this. If I must lose, then I will make it far more costly for you than it is for me." Panicking, Albus prepared to thrust the spear once more, only for Grindelwald not to move, and instead to take out a very familiar artifact, Gjallarhorn. The horn had been essentially dormant when they acquired it during the school task in Nibelheim, and yet now it was different. It shimmered in Gellert's grasp. No, it pulsed, as if each flicker was the breath of a dying star. Its shape was a contradiction, something that looked like a horn, yet refused to exist entirely in one space, one moment. Different parts of it flickered in and out of view, each facet layered over another, colors trailing behind like afterimages, vibrant, shifting hues, too perfect to belong to this world. The whole thing seemed to phase in and out of reality, as though it were caught between timelines, between realms. It was a horn forged from prophecy, from inevitability, and its surface gleamed like a rainbow bleeding into nothingness. Albus froze. His eyes widened as he slowly realized Grindelwald's last play. He yelled out, "No!" But it was too late. Before the former headmaster could stop him, before his soul could scream its warning loud enough to reach his limbs, Gellert brought the horn to his lips and blew. The sound wasn't a sound. It was pressure. It was prophecy. It was the weight of every choice made and unmade since the dawn of time collapsing into a single note. The call echoed not through air, but through magic itself, through soul, through thought, through fate. Albus felt his very soul vibrating with it, as if the world itself was taking a breath of silence. Finally, the horn crumbled in Gellert's hands, not like metal, but like light breaking apart into rain, fading as if it had never been. And the silence that followed was deeper than before. Heavier. Grindelwald stood tall now, steady, and he smiled victoriously. "Now we'll see what matters more to you, Albus. The call has been made. The end of days will start now, and you'll have to decide whether to hold it back and let me save the magical world on my own terms, or if you'd rather kill me, unmake my soul, and doom the entirety of humanity. You know that you can't do both. So which is it, Albus? Would you rather have a humanity under my rule or no humanity at all?" Albus stood there, silent, almost not believing the fact that Gellert was using Ragnarök, the end of days, the apocalypse itself, as a way to force Albus's hand. And yet, he was right. Albus would rather have a fraction of humanity surviving than complete extinction. He prepared himself to stop a breach from opening, to deal with the screams and deaths that would inevitably follow the horn of the apocalypse being blown. And yet, there was nothing. Gellert looked just as perplexed at him. Obviously, he wasn't expecting that either. Each of them stood there for a few seconds, which felt like an eternity, waiting for a massive disaster to occur, only for the world to stay silent. A squelch broke this silence. Dumbledore blinked, once, twice, as if his mind couldn't quite register what had just happened. One moment, Grindelwald stood before him, victorious, triumphant, the echo of Gjallarhorn still lingering in the cracks of the world. The next, he was still, but not in victory. He was still because he had stopped moving. The Dark Lord's breath hitched sharply, and his body stiffened. Albus followed his gaze down. A scythe had burst through his chest, its blade looking like a familiar shimmering fractal, a fragment of the chaotic void between worlds. Behind Grindelwald, the air fractured like old glass, and out stepped a figure clad in shadows and starlight, cloak billowing, eyes dark with purpose. Harry Potter. He didn't speak, he didn't taunt or explain, he simply stood there, one hand gripping the haft of the scythe as if he had always been meant to arrive in this moment. At this exact place in time, blade already buried in the heart of prophecy. Grindelwald fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he touched the weapon. It was only then that Dumbledore realized that the Dark Lord's injuries weren't healing. 458, Chapter 458, the final scene. 21st June 1995, Nurmengard. Harry Potter simply stood there, one hand gripping the haft of the scythe, as if he had always been meant to arrive in this moment. At this exact place in time, blade already buried in the heart of prophecy. Grindelwald fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he touched the weapon. It was only then that Dumbledore realized that the Dark Lord's injuries weren't healing. It took a few moments for Gellert Grindelwald to digest what had happened. Harry Potter had survived Albus's spear somehow, the weapon that the light itself had created from a fragment of its own dimension. A weapon that had been pointed at him, ready to consume Gellert's own soul for a ritual that he sought to usurp. Then came the pain. He hadn't felt it for a while, especially given his new body, which was made of energy, not flesh and blood. He had been vaporized, split in half, and the only semblance of pain he felt was when he was hit with his spear, which was beyond dangerous. Albus had been reckless and cruel, forcing Gellert to such a fate, to be undone, to destroy both of their souls for his recklessness, for his foolish dreams. Then again, Gellert would have done it as well. In a way, he had. His soul, his very being, had changed when he used it to channel the ritual. Nevertheless, physical pain was something he forgot a very long time ago, and yet he felt it with his fake flesh while he fell to his knees, and yet his mind was filled with something else, something more, clarity. With hindsight, he should have seen it coming. After all, why else would the boy die without any desperation on his face? Why would he accept death so readily during their battle? He had waited, deciding to let Albus and Gellert fight one another instead of being their common enemy, and then pick up the pieces. And yet, it didn't explain why Gellert wasn't healing. It didn't explain the sudden clarity he felt, the silence in his mind. He felt his old friend kneel down, try to hold the black blood pouring out of his wound, while yelling Gellert's name. The Dark Lord ignored him completely and murmured to himself, "It's so quiet now. It's never been this quiet before." And he wasn't lying. It was quiet. His thoughts were clear for the first time in decades. He had no urges to destroy everything around him, no tempting whispers of conquest. The dark, he realized. It was quiet for the first time. Did the boy sever his connection to the entity somehow? He didn't know, and he felt grateful to at least taste his freedom, even if he was dying in the process. Then again, it was better than Albus's ultimatum and the idea of losing his own soul. Meanwhile, the Potter boy retracted his scythe from Gellert's body and stood there, vigilant, his eyes hard with a neutral expression on his face. Albus, though, turned to him and demanded, "Heal." "I can't," the Dark Lord responded. He knew that he couldn't. He was practically helpless now, in a body that barely responded to him, a body that couldn't fully channel magic, as it was made of the dark, which he couldn't feel its connection to anymore. The only source of strength he had was the ritual in his soul. His only chance of survival, of achieving his dream, was to buy enough time to activate it, something that he doubted Dumbledore or the Potter boy would allow. The Champion of Light must have seen the truth in his words and quickly grasped the spear in his hands and tried to kill Gellert with it, hoping to usurp his soul and ritual within it, completely disregarding his supposed mercy or the idea of removing Gellert's potential afterlife. There was an irony to it, to how ruthless and pragmatic Dumbledore's decision was, and so Gellert closed his eyes, accepting his defeat. There was nothing he could do, no tricks up his sleeve. He watched as his old friend's spear was ready to impale him, only for it to fly away from Dumbledore's grasp. It was a spear created by the light itself. Gellert had recognized it the moment he saw it. Pure order and authority, enough that it was unraveling Albus with every use. The light's authority would negate any magic and shouldn't have been affected by any spell, and yet it was thrown away like a common wand hit with a disarming charm. It should have been impossible, unthinkable, really, and yet it happened. As it fell away from Albus's grasp, its light slowly faded. The former headmaster turned towards the boy, ready to attack him, only to freeze. Given the frantic panic on his face, Albus's connection to the light must have been severed too. It explained a lot, including how the boy disarmed him so easily. Albus turned towards Harry Potter and asked with a mix of fury and fear on his face, "What did you do?" The boy didn't answer, just staring impassively at him, and he asked again, "What did you do?" Finally, Harry Potter's eyes turned towards him, and he answered simply, "I fulfilled my prophecy. Ragnarok is over, and I won." It took a moment for Gellert to process this little fact before bursting into hysterical and disbelieving laughter. It was all so clear now, he could see it. The boy had played them like a fiddle and fulfilled the prophecy in a way that they hadn't seen it. The Dark Lord had always thought that he understood the workings of fate, enough to see their working, and yet he hadn't seen this. It was almost a classic that a prophecy would be fulfilled in a different way than people expected, one that was only understood after the fact. And so he laughed at its sheer absurdity. "You planned this from the start, didn't you?" "Yes," the last Peveril responded. "It was a bit touch and go for a bit, especially when Dumbledore joined you, but I made the move before we started our match." It was your attack on the light and dark after your duel with Dumbledore, wasn't it? The boy nodded. Yes. You assumed that I sent artifacts that would infect the light and dark, get them to attack themselves for no reason. You were correct. It would have done that, but there was a backup. I created a multiversal beacon and a breach, one that would only power if they are attacked with energy. The light and dark attacked my traps, hoping to stop them from spreading. They used realms' worth of energies, given the amount of energy within them, and they kept pushing and pushing, until it used enough energy to activate the trap, to create a breach to invite in one of the most dangerous entities that I have had the misfortune to know about. Gellert froze, waiting for the boy to continue. They call it the Hunger, the Devourer of Worlds, or Nidhogg, the dragon from Norse mythology. The boy simply shrugged. I'm not sure if someone just gave it the name or not, but that is what it has been called. I discovered it when I found some idiot trying to summon it as a weapon against the champions of light and dark. It was a relatively talented mage who had found information about it from Solomon's grimoire itself. He had made connections to it, living weapons that would feed it, and called them Dementors. Fortunately, he was sealed, and when he tried to return, I killed him and all the Dementors he created. Nidhogg is not a being. It's a concept of hunger, one that devours dead realms and dimensions and returns them to the void between worlds where the energies would gather and grow anew. A cycle of death and rebirth, one that cannot be stopped or halted, and unknowingly the light and dark invited it to feast on them. Fighting it doesn't work, resisting wouldn't work either. Not that it's stopping the light and dark from doing so. Gellert looked back at his wound, having almost forgotten about its existence. So this is why I'm not healing, why they didn't come when I used Gjallarhorn. The horn worked as intended. It paved the way for the light and dark to come and battle here, but why would they do that when they're too busy trying to slow down their own deaths? Conquest and influence don't matter much when you're fighting for your life. When you're in a battle for survival, not that they have a chance at winning in the first place, they're essentially trying to punch an ocean. Nidhogg always wins. It's inevitable. Sure, you've got some residual energy, which is why you haven't died yet, but it will run out quickly enough, and that would be it. Soon the light and dark will be fully consumed. It might have happened already, for all I know. Time is a material concept, in the end, one that Nidhogg devours alongside everything else. Gellert murmured to himself the very familiar part of the prophecy, only ash will remain, the final scene. A silent world, cold and unforgivingly serene. This was never about the material realm, was it? Yes, it was about the light and dark, and their final destruction. It's poetic, isn't it? They always assumed that it was their final battle, that Midgard would be destroyed and rebuilt under their influence, their guidance. And yet, it was the complete opposite. Prophecies can be tricky like that. Fate and death played them like a fiddle. Their conversation stopped as Albus suddenly summoned his spear into his hand and tried to attack the boy, who casually parried it with his scythe, only for Albus's weapon, the Spear of Light, to shatter into thousands of small shards of light which dissipated into mist and faded away. Albus fell down, trying to grasp the fading pieces, slowly accepting that the light was gone, that whatever hope he had of the boy lying or tricking them was gone, much like his weapon. He turned towards the boy, his eyes shaking wildly. Do you have any idea what you have done? For the first time since his return, the boy seemed annoyed. Do you have any idea what you would have unleashed? You tried to destroy the world and deluded yourself that it would save it somehow. You tried to enslave our people to the light and called it mercy. You tried to destroy thousands of years of history because of some foolish notion of a false utopia of order devoid of innovation or ambition. Ragnarok is over. The ritual is now useless. You're not saving us from anything, and yet you mourn the death of the entity that would have enslaved us. You, Albus Dumbledore, will be remembered this way. You are the fool with too much power who thought of himself as a god, who was fooled time and time again until he almost killed us all. You'll be vilified, even in death. Your precious legacy, your little narrative as some sort of savior, is gone. The power that protected you, that made everyone fear you, is not gone and will be forgotten. And knowing that, even before your death, just makes all of the shit you put me through worth it. Gelert's vision was beginning to blur now, blood, or whatever passed for it in this vessel, slipping between his fingers as he clutched at his side. The dark's energy was running out, doing its best to keep him alive, and yet it was inevitable. He could feel death's cold hands approaching, and yet he couldn't help but smile. Albus had always cared so much about the story, about how history would remember him, how the world would judge his actions. The noble champion of light, the wise protector, the man who saved them all, the man who would create a utopia that would change the magical world. Not anymore. The former headmaster shook in anger and sent a blast of fire at the boy, who redirected it with a flick of his wand and banished him away, snorting, "You've gotten reliant on the light's power. I have fought you both at the height of your power. Did you think that this poses any threat anymore? You're probably hoping to kill me, not because of some ritual, but because you don't want me to tell the world your story." Well, newsflash, it's completely useless. Did you really think no one noticed your little war? You two reshaped the landscape. They'll have to redraw the damn maps. Scrying won't work, Dumbledore argued, while slowly standing up, his body finally showing its face, though his voice faltered for the first time. Not through this level of magic. The ICW will deal with the aftermath, obliviate the witnesses, wipe the slate clean. Harry's tone was sharp now. That's true, normally, but what if someone arranged for a stable connection for divination before the battle even began? What if someone acted like a filter just in case things went wrong, so that the world would remember what happened today? Dozens of magical governments are probably watching right now, Albus. They saw him, he gestured at Grindelwald, blow the horn and threaten to end the world. They heard you admit that you wish to do the same, only do it on your own terms. They saw you lose your strength, the power that defined you for so long. If you die, then you'll be remembered just as I stated. If you live, then they'll know that you're vulnerable, and they'll take it out of you. How many lives have you ruined? Governments that you pressured with your power? There's no way you can win here. I made sure of that before I even came to Nurmengard. Albus froze, realization dawning. And Gelert? He laughed. Oh, how he laughed. They really had been outplayed from the start. It had always been a waiting game for the boy, and he could see it so clearly now. During their fight, the boy hadn't tried to kill him, not really, but contained him, delaying him in fields of frozen time, in prisons, waiting for his plan to take place, for the light and dark to perish, and moved only when his position was secure. It was poetic in a way that Gelert would lose, not through fate's hand, but by being outplayed. He had even planned for what happened after. That boy really held a grudge against Albus, and it showed. He had destroyed Albus, taken away everything he ever treasured, his purpose and his dream. There was only the ritual's energy left to deal with, the tempest in Gelert's soul, ready to be unleashed, and he was sure that Peveril had planned for it as well. As he expected, Albus took that reveal poorly and raised his hand, trying to attack the boy, only for the boy to conjure a bubble of time that froze him mid-swing and then pulled him to the ground. And Harry turned. Gelert didn't move, couldn't. The boy approached, slow and deliberate, the scythe still fractal, reality-weaving, dripping threads of potentiality. "No tricks left?" Harry asked, not cruelly, just tired. "No," Gelert whispered. "I suppose that this is checkmate, right? You do know that killing me will probably wipe out half of Europe, right? The ritual inside my soul will unravel. It won't be pretty." "I know, I'll be ready," he answered simply. Gelert's eyes widened as he saw the solemn look on his face. "You're going to die if you do this." The boy didn't answer, and Gelert felt the scythe enter his chest like a whisper. Clean. Final. He coughed once, his body shuddering, his limbs twitched, but not from pain, from fading. There was no scream, no theatrics. His body was slowly being undone, and it was final. "Tell me," he rasped, "the Muggles, they're a threat. You know that, right? You need to save our people." Harry met his gaze. "I have a plan." Of course he did. Gelert Grindelwald smiled, soft, nostalgic. The weight of centuries, of sins and ambition, finally slipped from his shoulders. He had passed his torch to a successor, one that would save the magical world, and he knew it. It might have been an enemy, someone who worked to destroy everything he had worked for, but who else would be worthy enough to guide the magical world than an equal, than the boy who beat him at his own game? For the greater good, he murmured. And then his body finally faded away, the last fragment of the dark in existence. His soul moved on, and the energy within it was released. The greatest ritual in the history of humanity was unraveled, and it started to pulse. The world held its breath for a fraction of a second, and then everything turned white. 459, Chapter 459, Birth of a Legend. 21st June 1995, Hogwarts. Cornelius Fudge watched with bated breath as the final Spanish champion was eliminated by Susan Bones. The girl was the last of Hogwarts' competitors and was doing a pretty good job at handling herself, using her weird rune magic. Cornelius was never an expert on these matters, choosing to concentrate on foreign policies and economic reforms rather than obscure forms of magic. But he didn't doubt that it looked impressive. Nevertheless, the task was almost over, and hopefully with it, a lot of his political and economic troubles. He didn't even care if Hogwarts won. To be fair, it would have actually been better for international relations if they lost, to avoid any potential allegations of cheating, not that there were. A lot had been riding on this tournament. It was the final stipulation from the ICW to finally retreat from their aggressive influence in magical British politics, as well as a revitalization of international trade. He had even heard a few rumors about partnerships in Hogsmeade, and more than a few potential new branches of shops on the continent opening there, hoping to cater specifically to Hogwarts students. It would have been preferable to happen in London, but Cornelius would gladly take what he could get. There were also a few stipulations about safety in Britain, but he was handling it on this front. On the Lycan front, Saul Croker, the head of the Department of Mysteries, had made contact, and they were open to negotiations to become citizens of magical Britain officially. And the Unspeakables had also confirmed that Lycans couldn't infect anyone or have any children, so it wouldn't be that hard to sell to the Wizengamot in exchange of peace. Apparently, their leader, this Red Witch, had perished. Cornelius didn't have all of the details, but he didn't care. That was one problem dealt with. The only issue was the Dark Lord, but Dumbledore had promised that he'd take care of it, in exchange for some political support later. He was likely vying for his former position as Chief Warlock, and Cornelius was inclined to give it to him. Having such a powerful figure back would bring a lot of stability to their country, and they could finally start to recover. But it all started with this cursed tournament ending on a good note. McGonagall did a good job of making it entertaining without any dangers. What happened in Olympus was still on people's minds, and they obviously appreciated the transparency during the task. It was also short, sweet, and with high stakes. Dumbledore's act with Ascalon was beyond genius. He got the ball rolling, and Fudge capitulated on him. The former headmaster was obviously doing a good job handling everything. And yet Cornelius was nervous. He'd been traumatized by everything always going wrong with any attempt he had to help his country's economy, and he was waiting for the shoe to drop. The truth was that he was tired. The previous couple of years alone were hellish. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong in ways that he never expected. Dumbledore trying to kill a child, a fake Grindelwald proclaiming his return, Azkaban's destruction, a new prison needing to be built, vampire attacks in the Quidditch World Cup, a fucking civil war against the Lycans, you-know-who's return, the ICW taking over, and the massacre of half of the Wizengamot. Seriously, and that was just the highlights. The truth was that he was tired, and if something went wrong again, Cornelius would retire. He had barely managed to wrestle control from the ICW after the mess in Olympus. Leveraging the death of a student to do so, something that he genuinely felt bad about doing. It wasn't worth it, not anymore. But as the task progressed and almost ended, he could almost feel everything going well. As if it wanted to prove him wrong, just as his thought ended, the entire sky started to burn. Everyone froze, including the champions who had stopped fighting, and just looked up as they saw streaks of light and darkness swallowing everything around them, dancing like some sort of play. He could hear the world tremble with what seemed like sounds of thunder or explosions, which reverberated in an obvious magical way. The castle shook once, subtly, like it had taken a deep breath and was now holding it. Even the ghosts fell silent, and just like that, everyone was looking at Fudge, who started sweating. He knew that it was too good to be true, but he had a crisis to handle, his final crisis most likely. He righted himself and turned towards Bones, who was staying with him in the top box, alongside a lot of the ICW representatives and the judges. Are we under attack? That had to be the main priority. By Merlin, he hoped that they weren't, but he wasn't optimistic. Nevertheless, the head of the DMLE didn't have time to answer anything. As one of the ICW representatives, Heinrich Eberstadt, spoke up loudly, "We knew that Britain was unsafe, but not that we would be attacked in the middle of an international event. Again, you made your reassurances, Fudge, and there will be reparations for this." Merlin, Cornelius really hated that man, who was literally likely being attacked, but focused on gaining some sort of political leverage. It didn't matter that the ICW was the one that provided most of the security details enforced by Dumbledore himself, and that they used this access to get free reign over the castle, despite McGonagall's obvious resentment of it. Thankfully, the Bones matriarch interjected, having received a small ball of light, a way that auras used to communicate with one another quickly. "I just got a message from one of my auras. There isn't an attack. What's happening isn't even in Britain." With all due respect, Madam Bones, the sheer amount of magic needed to make such an effect would be incalculable. "And yet it is true," another ICW representative said, a French man whose name Cornelius forgot. He was holding a piece of parchment where words seemed to appear on. "I just received an emergency message from France. It seems that they are seeing and feeling the exact same thing. This isn't something unique to Britain. We are not under attack, but a magical event of this magnitude is still worrying." Oh, thank Merlin. For once it wasn't his responsibility to deal with. Cornelius would have kissed the man if he could. He just took the time to slump in relief and saw that Amelia Bones, for all her composure, also relaxed slightly. She must have been worried about her niece being caught in some sort of attack. And now it was time to be on the offensive. And so Fudge put on his most severe voice and spoke up. "Can anyone track it down? We need to know where it is so that we'd be able to investigate it first." One of the judges, a Spanish wizard, waved his wand in some complicated patterns, casting a spell that Cornelius had never seen before, muttering incantations in some foreign language, before releasing it with a flick. A large illusion of a map of Europe appeared in thin air, which started to narrow towards the general location of the magical anomaly. It seemed to be somewhere in Austria, if he wasn't mistaken. It was final proof that this had nothing to do with Britain, and yet the ICW representatives seemed to stiffen and pale in fear. A few even trembled slightly. Bones jumped at the opportunity. "What is this? You obviously know something." Eberstadt, who had previously been completely steely, spoke up with hesitation. "We cannot know for sure if it is involved, but this general area is very close to a certain magical entity." "And what is it?" Bones asked, not relenting. "Nurmengard. Whatever is happening is likely centered around Nurmengard." That struck the entire room speechless, and whatever comfort the minister felt evaporated completely. This was where Gellert Grindelwald was being held, the man who had brought Europe to his knees. The man whose duel with Dumbledore was that of legends, the monster whose war still had scars to this day. Fudge spoke up first and asked, "Where is Albus Dumbledore?" They all turned to where the former headmaster's seat was supposed to be and saw it empty. Now that he thought about it, Cornelius hadn't seen him since the task began. An uncomfortable murmuring spread around the room. They had probably realized the same thing. Bones turned towards the Spanish judge who had found the source of the magical effect. "Can you tell us anything about what's happening there?" The old man shook his head. "My dear, I have mastered many divination spells. What I did was search for surges in magic, which is easy, but that much energy would scramble any form of clairvoyance and scrying. See?" He waved his wand in another pattern, letting a ball of mist appear, only to freeze completely as a veritable battlefield took place in front of them, very clearly. "How is this possible?" another judge asked. The Spanish judge replied, "I do not know." Cornelius didn't care what they said next, looking completely transfixed by the battle before him. Albus Dumbledore, with white wings on his back and some sort of glowing spear, was battling a gigantic black dragon of energy that turned into some sort of demon, until finally it fell, and the sky started to right itself slightly. It was a duel unlike anything Cornelius had ever seen before. It was more like two gods battling themselves than an actual fight between mages, but it was the reveal of the demon thing being Grindelwald that shocked them all. No one had said anything in this time, no one gave any orders or did anything. After all, what else could they do against beings like them? There was an irony to it that someone as powerful as one of the gods battling had sat in front of him in meetings and acted like a kindly old man. The dichotomy of it just made him breathless. No wonder people feared them. No wonder the ICW had done their best to appease him and had backed off Britain in fear of him. Nevertheless, everything looked to be going well. Good had triumphed over evil. Dumbledore was victorious, but then they started to talk and everything came apart. Genocide, the end of days, dooming humanity. What, in Merlin's name, was going on? Cornelius barely caught half of their conversation, and his skin got paler and paler as things went on. It was ironic. Dumbledore wasn't their savior. He wasn't their hero. If anything, what he was fighting for was just as horrible as Grindelwald's. He also wished to destroy the world and rebuild it to what he thought it would be. He had admitted to committing atrocities for his dream, for his illusion of a utopia. That they worked together to build the ritual that made all of this worth it in the first place. The only issue was that they seemed to want to use it differently, trying to achieve different visions of the magical world, which led to this conflict. He had never entertained the idea that Dumbledore would ever work with a Dark Lord, especially the one that he had defeated in the first place. And yet he was, freely admitting it, as if nothing had happened. They were watching a battle that would define the fate of their world, and yet both choices were as bad as one another. No matter the winner, they would be enslaved to their designs, taken from their homes, their world destroyed by their machinations. He didn't want to believe it. He barely even wanted to acknowledge it. But this wasn't some political nightmare that he could just stall for as long as he could. This wasn't some foreign influence interfering in his affairs. This was power, pure and unrestrained power, and there was nothing he could do about it. No one said anything in this room. What good would it do? What could it change? There was nothing any of them could possibly do. The battle was halfway across the continent, and if they could intervene, what could they have done? He hoped that something would come and save them at the last minute, and then it happened. Someone intervened. A scythe appeared from thin air and skewered Grindelwald in the chest, revealing Harry Potter, and this time the wound wasn't healing. Harry Potter was the boy who had come out of nowhere in the last few years, yet everyone still remembered. He caused more than a few headaches for Fudge and the Ministry, but he'd planned to use him as their new deterrent, their new Albus Dumbledore, after his impressive display in the school tournament. It was a pretty long-term plan, though. He had planned on offering the boy some perks politically, helping him, and only start making moves after he graduated, if he was still in office, of course. Then the boy disappeared for a few months in Durmstrang. His reappearance was surprisingly not that big of a deal, given that it happened soon after the mess in Olympus, which was already preoccupying everyone's minds. In the meantime, Fudge had to deal with the political instability of half of the Wizengamot being dead or in hiding, and a bloody civil war. He didn't put much thought into the skilled boy. And yet here he was, saving them all, having defeated Grindelwald and easily trouncing Dumbledore, who was kneeling down trying to save the Dark Lord, like one would an old friend, not someone he wanted to kill. The boy cleared up a lot of things, but he got his own share of questions. And Cornelius had no idea what any of it meant. He heard the words being said, prophecy, the light, the dark, something about multiversal breaches and some ancient devourer. But it all blurred together in his head, half-remembered myths and stories he'd dismissed as the kind of nonsense unspeakables wrote about when they drank too much. What truly mattered was gold, politics, and the reality in front of them, not dreams and stories, not old legends that would have been in a book by Beetle the Bard, not history books. And yet the boy was speaking of it as fact, and a few of the ICW representatives did gasp a few times at the revelations, especially about the light and dark being destroyed. The boy's voice wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it cut through the noise, through the silence, through everything. And what he said, it ended Albus Dumbledore. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a condemnation, not of his power, but of his purpose, of everything he had stood for, every legacy he had built. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had nearly destroyed the world, and worse, he thought he was saving it. Harry Potter stripped him bare, called him out for what he was, not with fury, but with clarity. The kind of truth that didn't need to be shouted to be believed. He didn't just defeat the most powerful wizard of the age. He dismantled him and revealed that he'd been the one who arranged for the scrying to not be overwhelmed by the magic, that the world would remember him as the man he was. Heinrich Eberstadt, the ICW representative, broke the silence, his words shaky. The public cannot know. The Spanish judge shook his head. It's too late for that. Anyone with a fragment of skill in scrying or divination would be able to see what we saw, even in the future. I have no doubt that half the world's magical government is watching this with us. You cannot stop it, even if you wanted to. Whatever response was swallowed up as the boy killed Grindelwald. The man's body cracked like glass, slowly moving all over the body, with some golden light seeping through it. And just like that, there was an insane release of energy that destabilized that scrying, enough for them to actually be sent back by a mere illusion. The entire room box was in disarray, with chairs and furniture being torn from the ground. An emergency barrier flared to life at the last moment, shielding the top box from the worst of the backlash. But it wasn't enough to keep everything intact. Papers flew, the illusion shattered completely, and half the delegation was flat on the floor, groaning in pain or stunned into silence. Cornelius clung to the rail, coughing through the dust and magic still humming in the air. Someone muttered a quick stabilizing charm, anchoring the box again. Bones barked orders for everyone to check in, and slowly the chaos ebbed into tense silence. What just happened? Someone asked. He didn't know who. It didn't matter. A thin, older man in dark green robes stood up. An expert, by the look of him, one of the ICW's magical theorists most likely. His voice was grave as he spoke. Killing Grindelwald didn't just end the fight. It destabilized the ritual, whatever it was. That amount of raw, unanchored magic, it should have vaporized the entire area, everything around it. Dumbledore, Potter, the land itself. Gone. The fact that the backlash somehow traveled through divination is almost unheard of. I'm being very optimistic here, but a ritual of this magnitude being unraveled would have destroyed half the continent at the very least, and that's a very conservative estimation. That silenced them more than anything else, and someone used divination once more and saw that there didn't seem to be any damage outside the area itself. Everything took a breath of relief at the thought. But it didn't, did it? Fudge said quietly, feeling his heart beating loudly at the sheer stress this was causing him. No, the expert replied, shaking his head slowly. No, it didn't. The boy must have known what killing Grindelwald would trigger. He must have had a countermeasure prepared to contain the blast. It's very unlikely that he or Dumbledore survived, especially given the statements he made. If I had to guess, he had to be there. He had to personally perform the spell, and he knew that he would die. He just did it, just to save us all. Cornelius sank into his chair, staring at the space the illusion once occupied. Gone. The boy, Dumbledore, everything. He muttered more to himself than anyone else. So that's it then. No, Bones said, already standing tall, already composing herself. It's not. We've got an entire world to calm down. Eberstadt nodded grimly, wiping soot from his face. We'll need emergency obliviator teams dispatched everywhere. There will be panic in the Muggle world. We'll blame it on a solar flare or a comet being near or something. As for the magical world, the public cannot be allowed to think the world nearly ended. But we can't hide this, Bones added. Not all of it. Not anymore. Silence. Cornelius closed his eyes, then opened them. His voice was tired, older than it had ever sounded before. Then we give them a name. A story. If the world needs a face to explain this, they'll get one. He looked out past the ruined box at the trembling sky. Harry Potter, he said, will be the martyr, the one who saved us all, the boy who gave everything to stop the end. That's what they'll remember, not Dumbledore, not Grindelwald, not the world nearly ending, only the hero who saved it. It will keep them preoccupied, hopeful, and that's what we need. No one argued, because deep down they all knew it was true. They needed a symbol powerful enough to distract from the questions they couldn't answer, from the truths they didn't understand. Harry Potter would become the story, a legend, a shield against panic. Eberstadt was already composing a dispatch in his head. Cornelius could see it. He was good at that, turning catastrophe into press releases. The rest of the ICW officials slowly picked themselves up, their faces grim, solemn. They would fall in line. They always did, especially when they had something neat and clean to package. And this would be perfect. A selfless boy, a sacrificial battle, a death too noble to question. Someone would write a book. Someone would build a statue. Cornelius didn't care, not anymore. He would retire after this term. Life was too short to spend trying to deal with one mess after another. It was likely foolish. The acclaim of being home to Harry Potter, the savior of the world, would have been more than enough to help fix Britain's economy. He could already see the surge of tourism from other grateful magical places, maybe even rebuilding Godric's Hollow as a tribute to him. But he was just tired. He just watched the flickering remnants of the illusion spell fade from the air and whispered, "Goodbye, Harry Potter, and thank you. You might be gone, but the legend remains." 460, Chapter 460 of Sprouting Seeds. 21st June 1995, Nurmengard. And then his body finally faded away, the last fragment of the dark in existence. His soul moved on, and the energy within it was released. The greatest ritual in the history of humanity was unraveled, and it started to pulse. The world held its breath for a fraction of a second, and then everything turned white. Harry Potter had planned everything to the last detail, and yet he had to admit that things came pretty close to unraveling, especially during the battle with Grindelwald and Dumbledore. He hadn't expected Dumbledore to win so quickly, or for the light spear to be so effective against the Dark Lord. To be fair, it was the perfect weapon against him. Something that absorbed life force was the direct counter to a being whose flesh couldn't be destroyed, and that had an insane amount of energy in his soul to deal with it. He had made his calculations, and the ritual should have taken slightly more time to work than his own portals and traps. But he didn't know the effect of Grindelwald using his own soul to fuel it, whether it would increase the time or not. He only did these calculations with Nurmengard in mind, hoping to force Grindelwald to constantly weaken himself, trying to keep his fortress and hence his ritual together. Harry hadn't expected Grindelwald to use his soul as a buffer just to bypass that disadvantage. He hadn't expected the battle to stray too much away from Nurmengard either, as it was the center of the ritual. He hadn't expected Dumbledore's new spear as well, and that meant that he had to adapt to buy himself some time. Turning them against one another was supposed to end in an endless stalemate, with both of them regenerating through their patrons until Nidhogg would start to attack the light and dark directly. And yet Dumbledore had won with his spear, and Harry had almost revealed himself early just to restart the fighting until he felt it. The feedback of the portals opening to Nidhogg, of the living concept of hunger and entropy attacking the light and dark at once, meaning that he won in every way that mattered. It had been obvious in hindsight. The whole plan hit him in the head the moment he began to think of Solomon's plan, specifically when dealing with Azkaban's ruins. He had arranged for Acrisdis to get his grimoire, knowing that he'd make a connection with Nidhogg, that the breach would grow too strongly after the fortress's destruction, and he arranged for Harry to go there and see the hunger, the devourer of worlds, with his own eyes, letting him use his arcane hearing to be able to replicate the breach into a trap against the light and dark. It was never about learning Solomon's magic, even if it had been very helpful in keeping up with Dumbledore and Grindelwald and allowed him to bypass a lot of power requirements, which were necessary in hindsight. But it was obvious that the main objective was always Nidhogg. Thousands of years of planning, of small steps taken seemingly at random, converged to a perfect plan. the perfect strike against the light and dark. They wouldn't be summoned to Midgard even when Gjallarhorn was used because they were too busy surviving, and whatever power-ups they gifted to their champions would quickly fade with them. Hell, even Grindelwald's body would malfunction quickly. All he needed to do was put the final nail in the coffin and deal with the release from the ritual. 7 major broken prophecies, enhanced by the summer solstices, enhanced with months thanks to ley lines, all being released at once. It was a nightmare to deal with, but it was also an opportunity. And so he did his preparations, and when he was done, he stabbed Grindelwald in the chest with his scythe. It had such a vindicating feeling to finally kill him, the man who had arranged for all of this to happen, out of misguided arrogance and confidence in his divination. He took some pleasure in ruining Dumbledore, having arranged for any form of scrying to work, having done his best to endure that this moment, this conversation, would forever be immortalized in the annals of history. Scrying it, even thousands of years into the future, would work easily without any issues. They would know of Albus the Fool and Gellert the Arrogant, the 2 men who almost destroyed the world. And so, Harry finally killed Grindelwald, leaving Dumbledore for last. As he expected, the Dark Lord started to disintegrate, his body losing whatever cohesion it had and cracking like glass, letting the energy from the ritual slowly leak out before bursting out as his soul moved on. The only thing remaining was his final trick, the last way to close the circle, and the magical world would be free at last. And so Harry used the remaining energy stored in the Elder Wand, which he had absorbed during Excalibur's destruction, and channeled it through his scythe, expanding space around Grindelwald's soul, containing the blast as much as possible. He groaned as he did his best to contain a magical release that could wipe out an entire continent, and activated his final trick, hoping that it would be contained easily enough. Dealing with the magical release was always the endgame, the final sentence, the final plan. He'd made his preparations well before the battle. Grindelwald hadn't seen it because he very likely just couldn't. It was funny, magic, for all its abnormalities, tended to act a lot like normal energy, at least in its raw form. One couldn't just make it disappear, you could store it, channel it, transform it into spells. But this was the equivalent of someone trying to hold on to a nuke. And Harry was holding it. Every drop of magic he had ever stored, every trace of energy accumulated over months of preparation, was now being burned to keep the ritual's release from tearing the world apart. His magic circuits burned as they channeled power far beyond what any physical body was meant to endure. And yet he held on and started singing. The realm bloomed slowly, painfully, like a star birthing itself from the void, raw, pure, painfully radiant. It wasn't a sanctuary, it wasn't protection, it was a prison, a white dome of containment made of nothing but magic and defiance, layered over and over again as the pressure kept rising. He sang again, and again, each verse folding into the last, twisting the rules of space, time, and energy until they screamed in unison. The realm became blinding, light pressing from within, luminous and infinite, as if the entire world had turned into a sun. It wasn't sustainable. It wasn't meant to be. It was a pause, a breath before collapse. Then his countermeasures were finally activated. Harry almost released a sigh of relief. At least he would have if he weren't still stuck singing the realm that contained a magical disaster from happening. The ground beneath him pulsed. Runes, ancient and interlocked, revealed themselves in a burst of gold and silver. They cracked apart into fractals, shards of reality bending to his design, and transported the entire clearing through space, vanishing in a shimmer of collapsing containment, leaving an immense crater in its place. There was a reason why he couldn't use the void between worlds to help contain the ritual. It was already tricky to transport that much energy without accidentally rupturing space-time. High-density magic bent the rules, warped space and time in subtle but dangerous ways. Normally imperceptible, but not now. Not with a ritual of this scale. Any attempt to displace it through a portal would have ended in disaster. He couldn't have used a normal portal, but actual breaches to avoid them collapsing in the first place, and then he had to make sure that the breach would be stable and remain stable, which was what took so long in the first place. He opened his eyes and finally smiled as he found himself in a familiar location. Stonehenge. This place had seen its fair share of excitement in the last couple of months, from Dumbledore almost destroying it to heal himself after their duel, then to Harry saving its energy, and the time-traveling god that tried to usurp it. Ready, Harry concentrated, focusing his magic to make the realm smaller and smaller despite the pressure. This was the finish line, his last piece of responsibility to the future, his gift to the world. It took some effort, but the realm shrank. He yelled in exertion as he did so, and he kept pushing, while walking to the center of the prehistoric stones. And yet, he didn't touch them. Instead, he knelt down, his realm of energy almost the size of a marble. His magic circuits were hissing, steaming, really. And yet, as if hypnotized, he knelt down to a familiar golden sapling and sank the miniature realm into it. The moment the marble of compressed energy touched the roots, the sapling pulsed once. Then it blazed. Golden light, not fire, not heat, just light, radiated from the core of the young tree, pulsing like a heartbeat synced with the world itself. The air stilled. The stones of Stonehenge trembled. Harry raised his head weakly, just in time to see the sapling split open, golden bark fracturing like glass, not in destruction, but in metamorphosis. And then it grew. It didn't rise. It ascended, soaring skyward in a spiral of glowing branches, golden leaves bursting into existence with each heartbeat. The roots dug into the earth, the trunk thickened with impossible speed, spiraling upward like a spire of molten sun, taller than mountains, taller than clouds, until it dwarfed everything around it. Light bled from every inch of it, pure, golden, sacred. The core of one of the oldest forms of magic on Earth, concentrated into a seed with the desire of protecting humanity, enhanced with the essence of a god of insight and the power of the greatest ritual the world had ever seen, merged into a single being. Like a circle being completed, the World Tree was born, a monument, a shield for Midgard against external threats, a beacon of safety for humanity, and very likely the single most important event in history. It was fitting in a way that Midgard's savior would be born on the day of its freedom from the light and dark, on the day of its greatest victory. Harry slumped down, letting his magical circuits cool off, feeling relief as his final goal was fulfilled. The prophecy was fulfilled, the ritual was stopped, and he now had arranged for the material realm to have its own guardian, ready to protect it. He let his back rest against the roots, which no longer looked like roots at all, but veins of starlight sunk into the earth. The bark glowed softly behind him, still warm with lingering power, the air thrumming like a lullaby wrapped in sunlight. Above, the branches unfurled into the sky like arms embracing the world, their golden leaves catching starlight that hadn't even reached Earth yet. The ritual's energy was gone, not sealed, not destroyed, but repurposed, reforged into something enduring, something sacred, and Harry, for the first time in what felt like years, let himself breathe. Of course, there was only one last hiccup, one last thing, until he could be at peace again, and that particular problem was staring at the World Tree with pure awe in his eyes. Albus Dumbledore slowly straggled up, staring at his greatest creation, and spoke, "What is this?" Harry almost regretted not killing him before killing Grindelwald. But the man wasn't a threat, not anymore, and the ritual took precedence. The World Tree took precedence. But now he had a few final words to say to the man. He needed him to see what Harry had accomplished, that all this talk of greater good while committing atrocities was absolutely useless. "This is humanity's victory," Harry said, voice soft but steady, "and its protection, all in one." He pushed himself upright, slowly, letting his hand trail along the bark behind him. "You were wrong, Albus, about everything that mattered, about control, about utopia. Humanity is flawed, messy, and beautiful in its imperfection. Your dream of perfect order, it was a fantasy. It would have crushed us under its weight." He stepped away from the trunk, golden light dancing across his skin. "This tree will protect the magical world from what's outside, and from what's within. Even now, it's beginning to reshape Midgard. One world is becoming two, one magical, one mundane, not in the way we used to hide, not illusion or deception, but separation, realm and realm. Harry let his eyes drift up to the glowing canopy. In a few years, the split will be complete. Muggles won't perceive us, won't find us, won't fight us, and we won't be able to affect them so easily either. It'll stop the war before it starts. That's what this is. Not peace through dominance or erasure, but peace through distance, mutual safety. Dumbledore's voice was quiet, strained. And the Muggle-born? They'll adapt, Harry answered. They'll grow up in the Muggle world just as they always have. But their magic will tether them. They'll feel the call. They'll never belong entirely to one side, and that's how it should be. They'll bridge the gap. Imperfect, maybe, but far better than bloodshed. They'll cut it down, the former headmaster retorted. Muggles will notice it, and the wizards will try to destroy it to preserve the statute of secrecy. They could try, but I don't think they'll be even successful, even if they could perceive it. The tree protects itself. It's hidden, its presence layered in illusions, not just of sight, but of thought, of memory. The world won't see it until its work is done, until its purpose is fulfilled. By then, secrecy won't be necessary anymore. The statute of secrecy will be obsolete. Children will be able to use magic without having to hide, without fear of being attacked by Muggles. This is it. What you and Grindelwald wished you could achieve, only without the genocide and domination. But through lies and deception, the former headmaster gritted out. Perhaps. But it worked, didn't it? Dumbledore remained silent for what felt like an eternity, before glaring at Harry. You really did take everything from me, didn't you? You destroyed my reputation, my legacy. You ruined my dreams for Britain and the world I wished I could create. You took away my power, my light, my purpose. Even now, you perverted my dream into this thing and are taunting me with it. Harry suppressed the urge to groan. Sure, he had wished to use this as the final nail in Dumbledore's coffin, his proof that he'd won in the end, and yet even now the former headmaster was denying his involvement, justifying his actions. No, he wanted the man broken. He wanted to rip the illusion, and so he shook his head. After all this time, you still don't get it, do you? You still don't see it. You don't see the monster that you are, that your failures, that your dreams were nothing more than perversions of goals. Maybe it was because of the light's influence, maybe not, but it doesn't change anything. Harry took a step forward, eyes gleaming with the golden light of the tree behind him, and his voice, though calm, carried weight. You dreamt of saving the world, Albus, but you never trusted it to save itself. You dreamt of peace, but only through chains. You dreamt of order, but it was always on your terms. You cloaked it in pretty words, guidance, protection, mercy, but you never understood what mercy truly meant. You never trusted people to be better. You only wanted to be the one to make them so. Dumbledore looked away, jaw tight, but Harry wasn't finished. You called it a utopia, but it was your fear speaking. You feared chaos, you feared failure, you feared being wrong, and so you took power again and again until you forgot what it meant to be anything else. You burned away anything that you thought could threaten your precious order, committing one atrocity after another, not seeing yourself for what you became. Harry's voice dropped lower. I'm not here to gloat, Albus. I'm here to bury the world you tried to build. He turned to the world tree, whose branches now pierced the heavens, casting their light far beyond the horizon. This is what trust looks like. This is what real protection feels like. Something built not to control, but to shelter. Not perfect, but honest. And in the end, it will outlive us both. But that's not important, not now at least. What matters is what I'm going to do with you, Albus Dumbledore.